Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the MHA What If with another fanfiction. This is the first part of What If Deku Chose Revenge? All credits for this video go to their respective authors, so please support the real author. Check out the link in the description for more details. Please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanf. Izuku Midoriya stared at his feet as they listlessly carried him through the streets of Japan. His own hero had confirmed what he supposed he knew his whole life. He could be no hero. He was weak, quirkless. Perhaps Bakugo had been right all these years, a worthless Deku. As he came to an intersection, he was hit with an urge to go right. And in another life he did. But today, bitter and heartbroken, Izuku turned left, not even noticing the hero power loader charging past him to get to the site of a villain attack, his own thoughts drowning out the yells and commotion that followed. It was not until young Izuku Midoriya returned home that he realized the consequences of his choices. He had turned away from the sludge villain, who had escaped when he was talking to All Might, and walked away from a supervillain attack for the first time in his life. And on the news, his heart sank further than he thought possible. The sludge villain had kidnapped and murdered Katsuki Bakugo, and used his body to escape as the pro-heroes did damage control and rescued the civilians. Izuku did not move from his spot on the couch for hours. Not only had he lost his dreams, it was his fault the villain got away. It was his fault Kaken was dead. That night, he looked out his window and considered forcing it open, repaying the debt to the universe with his life, but he could not go through with it. Days later, he forced himself into his nicest suit and followed his mother to the funeral, somehow made even more sad without a body to bury. While he was there, Izuku could only stop and stare at the notebook Kaken had torched and thrown away. The tears fell freely, staining the already crisp pages that sat atop his lap. It was a simple ceremony. The most spectacular thing was that some of the pro-heroes who had failed to save Bakugo had shown up to pay their respects. And as everyone was leaving, the hero power loader noticed a young man with green hair had dropped a notebook. He picked it up and called to the boy, "Young man." Izuku and his mother paused as he turned. The hero was approaching, and Izuku froze as he noticed the man was flipping through the pages. "Sir, did you make all these notes on heroes? Even your friend?" he asked, somewhat amazed. Izuku nodded, sadly. "Kaken used to make fun of me for being such a nerd." Power Loader shook his head and turned so he was standing next to Midoriya, pointing out some of the notes. "Not to speak ill of the dead, but I see it differently. You even have notes on the type of equipment the heroes use to augment their abilities. How long have you been doing this?" Izuku wiped his eyes. "Since I was about 4, I found out I don't have a quirk. See, it was my dream to be a hero, but I learned that that's unattainable." Power Loader was taken aback by this. That was a rarity these days. But he eyed the boy for a minute. Quirkless or not, he knew his stuff. "Have you ever considered a career in support?" Izuku and Inko tilted their heads at the man. He pulled out a business card, and Izuku's heart leapt into his throat. "I'm a support professor at UA," he explained, "and with a sharp mind like yours, I think you could do well learning to build support tech for the pros." Izuku began to stutter, prompting Power Loader to chuckle. "Let me tell you something, what's your name?" "Izuku Midoriya." "Yes, sir." The boy stuttered out. "I was there when your friend was attacked. And no one had the right quirk to save your friend. And I hate that." He looked to the ground. "You can't save everyone in this field, and sometimes quirks aren't enough. That's where I want take support to. To do what quirks can't." "What quirks can't?" Izuku echoed, still processing all of this. Power Loader handed another business card to Inko. "Tell you what, young man. The exam is in 10 months. I will remember the name Izuku Midoriya. If I see you apply, I'll put in a good word for you. And if you want to discuss what being a support student means, give me a call. My condolences for your loss." This chance encounter between a pro-hero was one of 2 factors that had changed Izuku's life forever. The second was a news story that had played when they returned home that night. A minor villain had tried to rob a bank, and when he went to attack a woman, her husband had killed the villain with a gun. As part of the story, they brought attention to the fact the man was quirkless and had owned the gun illegally. But all Izuku heard was that a quirkless man had stopped a villain. He stewed on the events of the day as he laid in bed. Finally, he made up his mind. He turned on a desk lamp and opened a fresh notebook. On the first page, he wrote, Deku, the Hunter. A few days later, he called Power Loader and left an awkward voicemail on the teacher's answering machine. He scolded himself for sounding so stupid and awkward, but he was surprised to get a call back within the hour. Yes, you're the Midoriya boy, right? The gruff voice asked. Why yes, sir. I thought about what you said, and I was wondering if you could tell me where to start. I've never invented anything before. Izuku stuttered nervously. There was a silence at the other end as Power Loader considered this. Tell you what, kid, I've had a project in mind. You know that beach on the outskirts of the city? Where all the trash ends up? Yes, sir, why? Izuku answered. Meet me there tomorrow at dawn. You're going to need a crash course on how to build and invent. I've an idea. But this is going to take up a lot of your time. Are you ready for this kind of commitment? Izuku paused and took a deep breath. Yes, Power Loader, sir. I am. I want to create a world where no one like Kaken is killed again. I want to fill in the gaps that quirks can't cover. Midoriya heard a chuckle at the other end of the line. Then I'll see you in the morning, kid. Izuku barely got any sleep, heart in his throat as he waited on the beach. There was a loud bang, and he leapt about 3 feet in the air. Power Loader burrowed through the sand and sprung out in front of the boy. Glad you made it, kid? The pro hero greeted, brushing off his shoulders. Didn't want to keep you waiting, Izuku said, rubbing the back of his neck. Good. So, let's get down to the brass tacks, the pro started. I'm giving you some private info here, so this stays between us. Got it? Deku nodded. The entrance exam for support class is going to be in 9 months, and you're going to need to learn to build robots? The hero explained. Izuku panicked. He never even looked at anything about that. I wouldn't know where to start. The intricacies of fine machinery are something that are only taught of the most prestigious middle schools in Japan and… Yeesh, cut the muttering, kid. It's creepy, Power Loader laughed. That's why I'm going to teach you. See all this stuff? Izuku looked across all the trash across the horizon and gulped. Wise. We're going to use all this scrap garbage to build a robot. You're going to learn the ins and outs of inventing, and we'll put some muscle on your skinny ass too. Even support students are expected to meet some physical requirements. All right. Izuku nodded. Why yes, sir. So, where do we start? Power Loader grinned. Bring me that locker over there. You've got a lot to learn, kid. So, the next 9 months was a living hell of training for Midoriya Izuku. He dragged scrap around the beach, burned his hands with welding tools, learned different types of telescopic lenses, how to build a motherboard, how to wire circuitry, and, most importantly, how to weave these skills together. It was a training of body and mind. After a few months, it actually was not that hard of a transition for Izuku. He had always known what sort of equipment the pros used to enhance their quirks. He even had notes on Power Loader's headgear. It just became a shift of better understanding on how those items worked, and just how helpful they were to each hero. The day before the exam, Power Loader and Izuku stood on the beach and examined their finished creation. It was a robotic exoskeleton suit. It was blue with a pull-down visor, and they had even made red boots that looked like the ones Izuku himself wore. I like the boots. Nice touch, kid, Power Loader said, clapping his protege on the back. What do you say you take her for a spin? Izuku looked at the man shocked. Emi? The hero laughed. Of course. We built it to your dimensions, didn't we? I'm not fitting in there. Deku gulped nervously and pressed a button on their remote. The chest plates and leg plates opened up, and he stepped backwards into the machine as it closed around him. He reached up and pulled the visor shut over his eyes. Without warning, Power Loader threw a large rock at him, which bounced off the armor. Hey! Izuku cried. What was that about? Did it hurt, or did the impact dampeners work? Power Loader asked. Izuku paused. I could feel the push of the rock, but it didn't hurt. Yes. Power Loader fist pumped. You installed it right. That's the hardest part. Now test the flamethrower. Izuku raised his arm. Point it away from me, kid. The teacher shouted, shielding his face with his hands. Oh, right. Sorry, sensei. Izuku shuddered, point over the water and making the hand gesture that triggered the flame jets. He felt the heat shoot down his arms as fire shot from the wrist-mounted pistons. "Ha! Yes!" Power Loader exclaimed. "We did it! The fire mech suit dream is realized. Climb out, kid." Izuku climbed out proudly. "Think I'm ready?" Power Loader nodded. "Yeah, Midoriya, I do. Now remember, you'll be on a team for building, but you'll be scored individually, so don't let any hotheads take over for you. Stand on your own feet, and if all else fails, add flamethrowers. You are real good at flamethrowers." Izuku smiled. "Probably all the notes on Kaken." Power Loader's smile faltered. "I'm sorry about your friend, Midoriya. I know that's why you're really here now." Izuku looked over the view of the water. "Thanks. I mean, don't get me wrong. He wasn't always the nicest, but he didn't deserve that. I'm just glad I found a calling I can achieve without my quirk." "Well, you done good, kid. Now, go get some sleep. You've got a big day tomorrow." Unbeknownst to Power Loader, there was more to the calling than Izuku let on. Back at his home, Izuku had various news articles pinned to a cork board. The sludge villain was still at large, using Bakugo's corpse as a meat suit for his crimes, and for months, Izuku had been tracking the case, looking for patterns. But like his sludge, he was hard to grasp. Whatever his process was, it was pretty unclear. Izuku smiled to himself serenely, despite his frustrations. While he had found passion in what he did, support was a means to another dream. "Don't worry, Kaken," Izuku said, tacking up another article, "your suffering will end soon. I just need the right tools." The next day, Izuku rose bright and early, and slung his backpack on to head to the UA testing center. Part of him wondered why the support test was a full month before the hero test, but being a hero was a dream of the past. The test was odd. He was handed a card with Group D, Team A on it. He reported to the testing center for Group D, which was an arena-sized room filled with parts, and found that a lot of students were already finding their teams. Before he could ask around, he felt a tap on his shoulder. Izuku turned around to see a girl with pink hair beaming at him. He froze up. "Holy crap, a girl. You're Team A, right?" I could see from across the room. Izuku looked down at his card. The print was really small. "Ha!" The girl laughed. "Impressed? My quirk, I can zoom in on things. I made this precious baby to help with it." She pat the goggles on her head, swelling with pride. "I love my babies." She crowed. "What have you made?" "I'm Hatsune, by the way." Izuku froze up. His training with Power Loader was supposed to be a secret. He opened his mouth to give a weak excuse, but he was interrupted as a voice came from a podium at the end of the room. "Hello, Group D," yelled a man with blonde hair. Izuku internally freaked out. "That's Present Mike. He's the voice hero." He fought the urge to mumble. He had just been told for most of the last year how creepy it was, and did his best not to. "Every year, as you groovy cats know, we gather students for the hero course. And we have them fight some crazy robots to test their quirks. Can I get a whoop whoop?" Present Mike yelled. Izuku went to give him a whoop whoop, but no one else was, so he kept quiet. "Okay, you're all in zone. So what does this have to do with you?" A banner unfurled behind him, showing a giant robot that, "Well, Group D, you all are going to be building this bad boy, the zero-pointer. What say you make a bot that gives the heroes a hard time?" Midoriya and Hatsune exchanged glances, his nervous, hers ecstatic. "Teams, grab the blueprints for yours part, and when time is up, you will need to put the robot together." A panel in the wall opened, revealing 10 rolls of blueprints. Midoriya ran over to it and grabbed theirs, bringing it over to Hatsune. "So what are we building? What part of the baby are we in charge of?" Hatsune begged, bouncing on her feet. Izuku unfurled the sheet, and his eyes widened. "The weapons systems. Specifically, the lasers and flamethrowers." Midoriya met Hatsune's gaze, and this time, they were both ecstatic. It turned out, it was just the two of them on Team A, as the size of the zero-pointer did not mean it generally needed a ton of weapons. However, the two of them were more than enough. Midoriya was amazed at how easily Hatsum could make the precise lens for a laser that would maim, but not kill, any of the hero hopefuls, and she couldn't help but applaud him for his knowledge on flamethrowers. That propulsion system is something, she admitted. My babies only manage a 30-foot flame burst. How are you getting 50 feet? I must know. Izuku began to sweat nervously, although the welding torch in his hand wasn't helping. He flicked it off and lifted his visor. Let's focus on getting the W weapons on the M mounting system, Hatsum. Oh my god, I talked to her. He panicked. She pouted, I'll know your secrets, Midoriya. Just you wait. She flashed him a wicked grin. Izuku gave her a weak smile and turned back to his welding. Focus, Deku. Finally, the buzzer sounded, and the groups came together, wheeling their parts to build the robot together. As Hatsum and Midoriya mounted lasers and flamethrowers on both the treads and the arms, Present Mike was shocked on how many they made. Why, you only had to make one for each tread. He marveled. I know, but we had enough materials to really give this guy some firepower if you know how to wire it right. Hatsum boasted, throwing an arm around Midoriya. He burned bright red as she added, and this green-haired genius knew how to rig the babies real good. Present Mike was thoroughly impressed. I've never seen a zero-pointer with so much bang, but is its bark worse than its bite? Tune in and find out. He went to test the flamethrowers, and both Hatsum and Midoriya began to panic. No wait, there's people in. The flamethrower torched a wide radius 50 feet in front of them, a few of the other support students just barely managing to get out of the way in time. The way, Midoriya coughed, getting out from under the singed metal plate he had covered himself and Hasjum with. Present Mike boomed, that's spicy. 2 weeks later, a letter from UA came. Izuku and his mother opened it together, to find a hollow disk. The projection of Power Loader proudly crowed that he had passed the support exam with flying colors. Izuku and Ink both teared up and embraced. At long last, Izuku had found a way into the Hero Academy. But Izuku did something else in those 2 weeks. He got up early every day, and went back to that beach for scrap. And the night before he began support training, he stayed up, finishing his own miniature flamethrower. I guess you're the first of my babies. He chuckled to himself. I'll have to make you some brothers or sisters. Deku turned to the latest picture he'd pulled from online, the sludge villain using Bakuga's body to pull a robbery heist in Shibuya. Part of Bakuga's face had rotted away, revealing the muddy substance underneath. Despite how much the sight made Izuku seethe, he kept the serene smile on his face and turned back to his flamethrower. I don't think you're quite enough for our guest of honor. He opened his closet and pulled off a loose board in the back, stashing the weapon. Midoriya Izuku was ready for support class. On his first day, Izuku learned an important lesson, that his actions have consequences. As he walked into the main building, he heard some whisperings around him. As he looked around, wondering what everyone was talking about, he clumsily tripped over his own 2 feet. Well, so much for avenging my friend, he thought as he braced for his imminent death, but he blinked and realized he never hit the ground. He looked over to see a girl with pink cheeks had touched him, making him float. He'd have freaked out, but he was more taken aback by the burn mark that covered the right side of her face. Sorry, I didn't ask if I could save you with my quirk, she muttered, looking at the ground. I just didn't want you to get hurt. Okay, Midoriya, you talked to one girl during the test, you can talk to her. Thank you. I appreciate it. He stuttered, blushing horrendously. No worries, see you around, she said, taking off and avoiding eye contact. He stared after her for a minute. She seemed so sad. He couldn't help but wonder why. He jumped though as a hand slapped him across the back. Izuku turned to see Hatsum had come up to him, beaming. Then again, she usually seemed exuberant. Admiring our handiwork? Hatsum asked. What do you mean, our handiwork? Izuku asked, tilting his head. She tried to take on our zero-pointer to save a girl, Hatsum answered. I had to watch our baby in action, Midoriya. She got the burn for her trouble. Uraraka Ochako, I think her name is. Guilt panged in Midoriya's heart as he looked out where the girl had gone. Oh, we did that? His melancholic voice soared right over his classmate's head. We sure did. Don't worry, she's being treated periodically with Recovery Girl. The burns are just tricky. She squeezed his shoulders with her arm in a side hug. We should make babies together more often, Midoriya. We're good at it. See you in homeroom. W2. Midoriya stuttered out. Until class started, Midoriya could only think of two things: Hatsume's awkward phrasing of inventing things together, and that his invention had hurt someone who didn't deserve it. Even if it was on the orders of UA, he had never stopped to think about his inventions hurting an innocent person. It made his stomach churn. His thoughts were dashed as Power Loader crashed into homeroom on day 1. He stood up behind his desk and looked around at his class. He couldn't help but smirk as he saw Midoriya in his class. In the end, he didn't need to put in a good word for the kid. His work spoke for itself. Who can tell me the best type of restraint system? Power Loader asked. A boy in the front row raised his hand, but before he could speak, Power Loader threw a pair of bolas tied together around the boy's wrist. The balls clasped together, and then pulled the boy magnetically to a locker on the side of the room, leaving him clasped against the metal locker. Wrong. Power Loader yelled, "It's the magnetic bolus I'm teaching you to build." Midoriya. Pull Yukio off the locker and let's go to work. The work was fascinating. Smart magnets made sure the bolus wrapped around their target, fastened together, and then shifted to the nearest metal surface. As Midoriya was tinkering with it and his screwdriver, he barely noticed the morning had flown by as the bell for lunch sounded off. "All right, put your works in your drawers, not your pants, Yukio," Power Loader yelled at the class. Desk. Drawers. Christ, you can pick it up tomorrow. Support has the normal academics in the afternoon. The class groaned. "Look, I'm not going to sit here and lie to you and say Shakespeare is going to help you with support careers, but I want you to greet every class the way you would repairing a pro-hero costume, which is crapping your pants in excitement." Power Loader advised, "Now get out of here." "Hey Midoriya, you're almost as far into your baby as I am," Hatsume said from right behind him, making him jump. "I think you might just be my competition." Izuku grinned nervously as Hatsume walked past him. He still wasn't sure what he thought about her. He knew what he thought about lunchtime though. He was geeking out over meeting pro-hero lunch rush. Even with changed dreams, Izuku still took notes on the type of utensils and equipment the pro used to get his cuisine just perfect. But as he looked up from his food, he saw Uraraka right in his line of sight, cutting his bout of fanboyism short. He stood up and walked over to her. She was eating with a tall boy with glasses and a girl with large hands and eyes. "Oh, you're the boy from this morning," she said, slightly more cheery than she had been earlier, but still seeming a bit downtrodden. "Why's?" Izuku replied, fighting the heat that was rising to his cheeks. "My name is Midoriya Izuku. I wanted to thank you again." She gave him a small but heartfelt smile that made his heart skip a beat. I heard you fought the 0p pointer." Before he could go any further with that, her expression changed completely. A fierce, competitive and determined look hit her face. "I almost got it too," she gushed, "and you know what? It taught me something." Izuku tilted his head. "Taught you something?" "This is the big time," she crowed, clenching her fists and grinning wildly. "I have to step my game up if I'm ever going to support my family as a hero. I can't go letting some robot get the best of me. This," she pointed to her burn with wild abandon, "is the last injury I'll undertake in my hero training, mark my works, or my name isn't Uraraka Ochako." Izuku smiled. I'm glad you feel that way." Now it was her turn to tilt her head, confused. "Why do you say that, Midoriya?" He said, rubbing the back of his neck. "My team built the weapons on the 0-pointer. And after you helped me this morning, it was a bummer to see my work hurt someone so nice." She gave him another smile that made his stomach make a weird, twisting movements. "Thanks, Midoriya, but I'm stronger than I look." She winked at him. "Next time I go up against one of your machines, I'll tear it to pieces, so give me everything you got." Izuku beamed. "Why, no holding back, okay?" Ultimately, the first few weeks of UA went well for Midoriya. He was already learning the technical skills Power Loader had planted in his head over the last year, but as far as his secondary goal, "I'm stumped," he muttered into his fish as he sat at the dinner table with his mother. "Dear, are you okay?" Inko asked her son, worried. You're talking to your food again. Are you sick? Do you need to see the doctor? Oh, sorry, Mom. He replied, just said I'm full. This was delicious. He bowed before cleaning up his food. Inko frowned at her son though. He seemed different after Bakuga died, and she wondered how normal this was. What she didn't know was that after dinner, he was removing a board in the back wall of his closet and examining his arsenal. So far, he had the crude mini flamethrower, a fast-dispensing capture tape holder, a few pairs of magnetic bolus, easily concealable telescopic Christmas sticks, and a mechanical chest pack that would be helpful in storing and dispensing gadgets. Nothing that would help him catch the sludge villain, however. Since joining UA, he had even begun taking voluntary martial arts classes that were offered to the students outside of the hero course as well, just in case the need would arise where he was caught without his babies to defend himself. None of this is enough though, he sighed. Rolling back onto his bed before drifting off into an uneasy sleep, I need something that can stop that sludge bastard. This won't cut it. It would ironically be a villain attack on UA that would give him the epiphany he was looking for. It had been a few days earlier, classes had been interrupted by an emergency lockdown message had blared through the school. Someone unauthorized had entered the campus. As the students rushed the halls, Izuku had grabbed a pair of restraining bolus just in case, but it turned out there was no need. The boy with glasses, Ida, had found it was just some paparazzi who was trying to get in touch with All Might. The next day, while Izuku was in class, he learned that the break-in was a test. Support class was working devices for the upcoming sports festival. He remembered what Power Loader had told them as he gave them free rein of what they could build. Every year, the sports festival devolves into the hero class students showing off flashy quirks. The gruff teacher had scoffed to the class. That's dumb and I hate it. So, while I can't tell you what you'll be facing, I can advise you to work on versatile weaponry and work on your mobility. It's about damn time support class was the talk of the festival. Don't let me down. The word struck Izuku. Support students were only allowed a small backpack and any modifications they could make to their footwear. And when Hatsum added telescopic legs to her backpack, Izuku had a plethora of ideas. But it was one day as he was tinkering with his weaponry, Power Loader received an urgent call from the front office. What? He shouted, startling the class. At the USJ. I'll be right there. As he bolted for the door, he turned and looked at his confused students. Emergency staff meeting. Just work on your weapons until the bell rings, and don't leave until you get the announcement it's safe. Seriously. Don't move. Do you mean it's not safe? A boy towards the front shouted. Not everything is about you, Yukio. Power Loader screamed as he bolted out the door and down the hallway. As soon as he left though, metal plates slammed down across the windows, making a few of the students shout in surprise. Guess we're on lockdown, Izuku muttered, nervously. Hatsum overheard him and beamed. Teacher runs out and lockdown happens, huh? Sounds like a good time to get curious, huh, rival buddy? Izuku tightened a few bolts on his weapon pack and closed the lid on it. He gave his friend a smirk. I thought you only cared about building your babies? Even last time someone got in, they didn't plate down the windows. Midoriya, Hatsum replied, rolling her eyes. The security tech here is top-notch. Aren't you curious to see who managed to get past it and how? He tightened the lid on his pack and put it on. Absolutely. Wanna go spy? He managed to sound confident saying this, despite how nervous he was about getting caught. Perhaps she was rubbing off on him. She pulled her goggles down. Sure thing, partner. In his rush, Power Loader had forgotten to lock the door behind him, but Izuku put on his thermal goggles to see if anyone was still in the halls. Show off, Hatsum muttered, rolling her eyes, but smirking all the same. You're just mad yours don't do this, he replied. Coast is clear. As they snuck down the hall, eyes peeled for others, they came to the front door. Hatsum pulled a small metal rod from her glove and stuck it in the keyhole. It whirred and shifted, picking the lock in seconds. Your thermal vision can suck it? She grinned, putting the rod back in her glove. All right, I mean, that is pretty cool, he conceded, pulling out his notebook to jot down a few quick scribbles or her universal lockpick. They had both agreed they heard Power Loader say the USJ, but that was on the far side of campus. Usually the students were bused there. But then again they were tech students. Hatsum took the time to bust her new hover boots, taking long, 10-foot strides into the distance, but she seethed, as Midoriya's invention was telescopic spider legs, for total, with clawed bottoms, that sprouted from his backpack and carried him towards the building in even pace with her. You ripped that idea off from my telescopic stilts. She scoffed as she took another hop towards the large building. Yours only extend one direction, Midoriya argued, but mine have joints and work in tandem with where I direct them. I for the controls here on the straps to the backpack, and it's totally different, plus the amount of cabling I had to use to get them just right is much more complex than a mere telescopic rod and dash. Stop muttering or whoever broke in will hear us coming. Hatsum sneered. As they reached the side of the building, she seethed more at seeing his spider legs could even scale the side of the building by digging in with the claws. Before he got too high up the building, he turned and offered her his hand. "UW want a L lift?" She rolled her eyes. "I bet you love showing off, huh?" Truthfully, no, he was more panicking about how close they were as her carried her up the side of a building. Especially for how off-put she was at being shown up. Their attitudes shifted when they finally reached a ledge at the skylight of the USJ and saw just how grim a lockdown at UA meant. Midoriya's jaw dropped at the sight. Supervillains were strewn across the area, but more shockingly is that the teacher of 1A, who Izuku had come to recognize as Aizawa, was in a bloody pulp in the midst of the bodies of the thugs. Scanning around the arena, he saw what looked like the rescue hero, 13. Or, what was left of them. They appeared to be broken from the villain attack. He recognized Uraraka by them, holding off some odd, mist-like creature with some students he didn't recognize. Further past the villains, he recognized the girl with large eyes laid out in a bloody mess too. "It's too far to tell, but are Aizawa and that girl okay?" he asked his friend, nervously. She glanced at him and made a very uncomfortable face. After a moment, she replied, "The girl is moving. The teacher is not." But the most shocking part was seeing All Might in action, fighting toe-to-toe with a weird-looking muscle-bound monster with its brain exposed. Out of nowhere, All Might had hit the beast with a German suplex, but a portal opened up under the ground from one of the villains Izuku hadn't seen before. But just as shocking, a student from 1A he hadn't recognized used his quirk to freeze the ground, freezing parts of the beast. All Might managed to recover and the fight continued, but suddenly, Izuku couldn't focus on the fight. "Ice," he breathed to himself, suppressing the urge to laugh. "It's ice." He could see it in his mind, using ice to freeze the sludge villain, stopping him from using to quirk to slip through a drain or compress himself in a body. And then he could. "Move, idiot," he heard Hatsum yell to him. He blinked, and realized All Might had punched that monster right towards them, and suddenly, Hatsum tackled him onto the ledge they were on. The beast burst through the window right where he had been standing, and was sent hurtling into the sky. Whoa, the two support students breathed in amazement. There was more yelling and commotion from inside the USJ, snapping them back to the present. "Maybe we should get out of here," Izuku suggested, a little perturbed. Hatsum nodded, and together, they made a descent down the building and began sneaking their way back to class. Once back in support class, Hatsum and Izuku did not speak further, but not for the same reasons. The rest of the students had been quite freaked out, Hatsum perhaps more so after having seen the Nomo up close. Not Izuku though. Midoriya Izuku could not have been happier by what he saw. He didn't know the name of the boy in 1A with the ice quirk. But really he supposed it didn't matter in the end. What did matter was what happened the next day. Power Loader had given the class free rein once more to prepare for the sports festival, but no sooner had he cracked open a book had he been interrupted by the sight of a bushy, green head of hair at his desk. "What's up, kid?" the pro asked his secret protege. "Sir, what do you know about cryogenic weaponry?" Midoriya asked. At the rather confused look the teacher gave him, he was quick to add, "It's for the sports festival." "You know, for restraining the other students," Midoriya lied. Power Loader laughed and seemed to have bought it. "I like how you think, kid. Pull up a chair." It was only a few nights later, sitting at home at his desk, that Izuku laughed to himself as he completed his first freeze grenade. "We'll need a few more of you, but He looked over at the rest of the small cache of combat gear he had built for himself and grinned a broad, triumphant smile. I think we have just enough favors to throw our sludge friend a little party. Carefully placing the grenade amongst its siblings, Deku pulled out the flyer for the sports festival from his pocket and tacked it on his closet wall. But first, he pondered, rubbing his chin, a little field testing is in order. Let's see how my babies stand up in combat. It was then he decided to get back to his normal studies, reading The Art of War as requested by Present Mike. And perhaps it was serendipitous that right when Izuku was ready to focus on combat, he came upon a quote that struck great accord with him. Know your enemy, and know yourself, and you need not fear the result of 100 battles, he muttered to himself from beneath the small hum of his desk lamp. He looked once more at the sports festival flyer, and then to his old notebook filled with his studies of quirks. Maybe, he mused to himself, skimming the crisp pages of his earlier notes, maybe it's time I get to know some of the competition. Hey Kaken, Midoriya said, standing in front of the memorial of his childhood friend. He reached into his pocket and placed an All Might trading card on the grave. They both had that one as kids. It was one of the few times they bonded. So, Midoriya said, looking at the picture of Bakugo that rested on the memorial. Tomorrow is the sports festival. The wind gusted, causing the green-haired boy to put his hands in his pockets. It should be you, Kaken, Midoriya muttered to his feet. Not in support, obviously, but he fell silent. He wanted to cry, but Midoriya Izuku had not cried since the funeral. He winced as the words finally reached him. I should have died that day. It's my fault you're dead. I should never have tried to talk to All Might. Izuku sat on the ground next to the memorial. You'd win this no problem, Kaken. You were the strongest person I knew. After a moment of silence, Deku let out a bitter laugh. You'd hate me getting all emotional on you, wouldn't you? Deku stood up and looked at the picture of Bakugo once more. You'd hate that I'm looking for your body and the bastard who took it too. You always hated me trying to help. Midoriya gave the picture a small smile. We weren't great friends, were we, Kaken? No, I suppose you were kind of a bully, and I let it happen. Still, Midoriya looked into the sky. I wouldn't be any friend and at all if I didn't try to avenge you. Like it or not, I've got your back. The day had finally arrived. The last few weeks had been a blur for Midoriya Izuku, training himself in martial arts, working his body and reflexes, and a little studying of the quirks of the students of classes 1A and B. And now, body, mind, and tech all prepared, or as prepared as he could be, he supposed he was crouched at the starting line for the sports festival preliminary race. Midoriya's eyes darted back and forth from the students, most of them he recognized from classes 1A and B, and a few notable general studies students he had observed, but there were some he couldn't place. He just hoped his gear would get him through any unknowns. Weeks of preparation can only go so far when you don't know what you're up against. The starting signal went off, and Midoriya took off with the rest of the class, and as he ran, he hit a switch on his backpack. The backpack shifted some telescopic plates of armor down his arm, forming metal gloves down his fingertips. Just in time, he thought, because I'm pretty sure. His suspicions were confirmed as the boy in first place, the boy with the ice quirk, Todoroki. He had learned from his spying, turned and used his power to try and freeze the rest of the first-year students in place. He smirked to himself as he pointed his arms forward and bent his hands down to activate his wrist-mounted flamethrowers, not nearly as powerful as the ones he had placed on the zero-pointer, but powerful enough to cut a path through the ice blast, leaving Midoriya a path to charge through as he ran past a bunch of frozen classmates. Damn it, Midoriya, pouted Yukio from his class, stuck in the ice. From the viewing platform for the teachers, Power Loader watched while next to All Might. The number 1 hero squinted in confusion. Loader, that's one of your kids, isn't it? Toshiniro asked. Yes, sir. Power Loader crowed. Midoriya Izuku. He and that handsome girl are going to put me in the loony bin, but he can make a flamethrower out of a paperclip and a wet noodle if you give him enough time. It couldn't be, All Might thought to himself. The students rounded the corner, and screams could be heard as a plethora of zero-pointers erupted from seemingly nowhere to get in their way. While terrifying, Izuku couldn't help but pause momentarily to wonder, 1. Who suddenly mass-produced these when building 1 was an entrance exam, and 2. Where they were storing them this whole time. No time to ponder. He saw a few students from 1A use their quirks to smash through the Kirishima guy in a literal sense, the Momo girl with a rocket launcher of some kind, but Midoriya knew better. This wasn't time to fight. He flicked his wrist and a grappling hook shot from bottom of his arm plates, piercing the inner leg of a zero-pointer, the weakest spot, and propelled him forward through the air. He released the hook as he sailed past the arms of the robot, through its legs, and repeated the process to get through the second wave. And they said Legend of Zelda wouldn't do anything for me in hero school, Izuku smirked to himself. He was surprised though. He looked to his right and saw another boy from 1-0. He remembered using his quirk to do the same thing. To his left, he saw the girl with the large eyes using the same strategy, with her tongue. Ajuitiu frog quirk. They both landed next to each other and took off running. You were that girl who got really hurt at the USJ? Izuku asked, panting through his strides. She only slightly glanced at him. Kero, you're the boy who made friends with Uraraka after building these robots? Izuku replied, embarrassed. I'm glad you're okay. Suddenly, her eyes widened. Kero, watch where you're dash. He didn't hear the rest of her statement as he began to plummet towards the ground. He hadn't been watching where he was going, and had come up on a large valley and ran right off a cliff. I can build all this fancy crap, but I can't fix my common sense. Now I die, he thought, but his thoughts were interrupted as something slimy wrapped around his waist and hoisted him from the crevasse. Now, Izuku had come to realize Ajuitiu had a frog quirk. However, he didn't realize she could do what he just did, and was blushing furiously as she pulled him out of the valley with her tongue. She just licked me, what the shit, he thought, managing a weak smile and blushing horrendously. I'm glad you're okay too, Kero, she replied, giving him a small grin. Thanks. Be more careful. Good luck. With an amazing jump, she leapt to a rocky pillar in the distance. Midoriya was unfrozen from his trance as a hand slapped down on his back. He jumped and saw Hatsum preparing her own grappling hook. Now's not the time to flirt, lover boy. All right. He snapped back into reality and looked around to see Uraraka using her floating ability to travel from rock pillar to rock pillar. Hatsum was already climbing across her grappling hook rope. Ibra from Class 1B was using her vines to swing from the rock pillars. Jumping seemed to be the best course of action. He sprouted his telescopic spider legs from his pack and used them to take a running, springing leap to the nearest rock pillar, and sprang to the next one, until the distance came to be too much. He then let himself fall a bit, and used a grappling hook to hook a distant pillar, swing across the rest of the canyon in a wide arc to the other cliff face, where he clutched the side with the spider legs. Climbing the rest of the way, he panicked to see he had about 10 to 15 students ahead of him. He used his spider legs to catch up to the rest of the pack. Nice legs, so you said, now taking long hops alongside him. It was an impressive use of her frog quirk, so Midoriya smiled and replied, thanks. Yours too. Tsuyu took a somewhat amused expression. That's pretty forward for our second conversation, Kero. I guess you're not bad to look at either. Realizing what she meant, Izuku again blushed furiously. No, I'm sorry. That's not what I meant. Suddenly, everyone screeched to halt as they reached the final stretch of the race, a minefield. He and Tsuyu stopped right next to Hatsum. You got anything for this? Midoriya asked his rival as he watched Kaminari get blown up. She shook her head. Nope. How about you? No, she sighed. Well, this sucks, Kero, Tsuyu croaked. The two tech students grimaced at each other. Izuku retracted his spider legs and the two began to slowly pace themselves through the minefield. The rest of the students had caught up to them, and soon the field was littered with mines and students, leveling the playing field. This must have freaked out Todoroki, who suddenly froze a giant section of the field to race ahead, but left a path for people behind him. A lot of other students ended up getting them blown up in large, pink blasts just trying to reach the path. This is my chance. Midoriya realized, bringing his spider legs back out, carefully planting them where it was safe, and using them to launch over a gaggle of Hero Corps students, landing on the ice path. He planted his boots down, crouched, and used the spider claws to grab chunks of the ice path and propel himself forward like he was skiing. Not long after Todoroki made it past the minefield, Midoriya left it right after, clawing his way towards the taller boy. Todoroki turned and tried to blast the support student with his ice quirk, but Midoriya was able to lunge out of the way. Finally, the two of them burst into the arena amidst a chorus of cheers. Midoriya retracted his mechanical legs and caught his breath. Second place would do, for now. As the rest of the students made their way into the arena, he couldn't help but smile as Hatsum was in the top 20, right behind Tsuyu and Uraraka. "So how do you feel about the spider legs now?" he asked his support friend. "You can shut your mouth, man." Hatsum rolled her eyes, but gave him a smile nonetheless. As the rankings were announced, Midnight took the stage as the judge, announcing the next stage, a cavalry battle with sliding scales of points. Meaning the first place holder will be worth 10 million points. Midnight concluded. "Now team up. You have 15 minutes. Everyone turned to glare at Todoroki, who, despite his stoic nature, gulped. "Man, I'd hate to be that guy," Hatsum whispered to Midoriya. He nodded. "Right? Kinda glad I don't have that target on my back." "Hey, you wanna team up?" Hatsum asked. "Of course we're teaming up. I'd be pissed if you didn't. We're the only support students here, and you're my friend. Our tech together is going to look so good for all those support companies up in that box over there." She pointed towards an observation deck near the top of the arena. Her bluntness made him blush and smile. "Awesome. Let's go find 2 more people." "I have an idea. Let's go ask the Uraraka girl," Hatsum suggested. "I think we could combine my long fall boots with her quirk." "All right." Uraraka beamed at the idea after they had run it by her. "We'd practically be flying." "I'm in." The support students sighed in relief. "I was worried you'd already be teaming with Ida and Tsuyu," Midoriya admitted. Uraraka frowned. Ida said something me and him being rivals now, apparently, and went to team with Todoroki. Tsuyu got convinced to team with Mineta and Shuji, and I'd rather not be on that team. Midoriya furrowed his brow in confusion. "Why is that?" "Mineta is the biggest perv in the school. I'd rather not have his hands near me," Uraraka replied, blanching. "Ever since Mr. Aizawa expelled those 2 other kids on day 1, he's been nothing but a cocky jerk." "I had no idea," Midoriya lied. He decided not to mention that when he had been spying on the students of 1A to get info on their quirks, he had found Mineta spying on the girls. It was something of a double spying situation. Probably wasn't helpful to the sports festival. "All right, so we got maneuverability down," Hatsum deduced. "We're going to need someone to defend." The 3 scanned the rest of the students. They were running out of time and most students seemed to have already teamed off with each other. "Oh!" Uraraka exclaimed excitedly. "Him. Let's ask Tokoyami." As the students teamed, the teachers were discussing, or arguing, about their results. All Might could not stop observing the Midoriya boy. He hardly looked like the same timid boy he had saved from the sludge villain nearly a year ago. Yet here he was, now in the support program. More impressively, he managed to snag 2nd place in the preliminary race without a quirk, a feat that was almost unheard of for someone in that program. "Wow, you actually managed to get 2 students past the preliminary this year, Loader," Vlad King chastised. Power Loader had already begun to partake in a celebratory beer, and laughed loudly. "Just you watch, you damn knucklehead. Those 2 geniuses will take down any hero class kid you put in front of them. $20 says neither will make it to the finals," Ectoplasm chimed in. "It's a bet, Ghost Boy," Power Loader shouted. "Higuri," All Might said quietly to the support teacher, "tell me again about your 2 pupils there." Power Loader looked around to make sure no one was listening in. "Well, Hatsum is kind of a nut. She hardly listens to anything I say, but she's the real deal. I wouldn't be surprised if she'd been hot-wiring things as a toddler." "And the boy?" All Might asked. Power Loader leaned in closer. "Truth be told, I met him a year ago. Remember that sludge villain attack? The one that got away from you?" All Might's heart sank as he remembered that day. It was something he remembered as a particularly low point in his hero career. He had to crush the dreams of a young, quirkless boy, and then, due to his carelessness, the villain had escaped only to take another teenage boy hostage. Depleted of strength and unable to summon the conviction to go beyond his limits, the boy, Bakugo Katsuki, had perished. Still, he kept this off his face as he nodded. Midoriya, there was a friend of the poor kid who died that day. I met him by chance at the funeral. He dropped a notebook. And this kid, well, he's a bit of a quirkotaku because he's got none of his own. But his mind was sharp. Never invented a thing in his life. I may have given him a few pointers once he showed interest and support, but look at him now. Power loader finished, swelling with pride. All Might nodded but looked down at the field. Perhaps he had underestimated the boy. Tokoyami had agreed to be part of the team with Midoriya, Uraraka, and Hatsum. With their point total, they were in a semi-comfortable second place. So we're in agreement? Hatsum asked as they waited for the signal to start. Most everyone will be after Todoroki, so we stay in our rank. Play defense and go after the others if we have an opening. The other three nodded. The alarm sounded, and true to her prediction, every other team took off after the team of Todoroki, Momo, Ida, and Kaminari. However, before anyone could get close, Todoroki formed a large two-story ring of solid ice that barricaded them from the rest of competitors. A valid defensive strategy from the 10 million point leaders. Present, Mike announced. Truly a display of wisdom yet cowardice all at once? Tokoyami announced to his team. Oh man, if only we had a way of getting over that wall. Whatever shall we do? Hatsum whined, sarcastically. Hit it, Uraraka. Uraraka rolled her eyes at the command, but did as such. We're airborne. The group leapt. Just in time, too, as a pair of vines from Ibra came charging towards them to snag their headbands. Tokoyami used his dark shadow to defend from this attack as the four soared over the ice donut. Are we going in? Uraraka asked. Izuku paused for a minute and then cracked a rather unhinged grin. No, land on the edge of the ice ring. Todoroki and his teammates looked up in shock as Midoriya's team landed on their barricade. Winter's over. Midoriya yelled, pointing his flamethrower towards the part of the wall to the left of Todoroki, unleashing a burst of flame that easily cut through the ice wall. As it crumbled, the team of Shuji and Mineta, as well as a team led by Nito of Class 1B. As Todoroki had to physically turn to use his right side for his ice quirk to try and defend along with Momo and Kaminari, Midoriya took advantage and began melting the opposite wall, causing another flurry of teams to charge in. Soon, it was utter chaos within the icy ring of the cavalry battle. Point cloths were being nabbed left and right, and the rankings board was going insane. Such savagery you have inspired, Midoriya, Tokoyami commended. The dark machinations of your mind are analytical and cunning. Thanks, he stuttered out awkwardly. Yeah, but we keep fluctuating in and out of second and third place as these points go insane. Uraraka pointed out, nudging her head towards the scoreboard, and we only have a few minutes left. What should we do? Their strategizing was interrupted as a long, prehensile tongue came shooting up at them from the circle below. In their surprise, Tokoyami was barely able to block via dark shadow. Let's move, Hatsum yelled, prompting Uraraka to levitate them again. But as they went to jump, Tsuyu's tongue and a shot from Siro's tape caught her boot, causing it to break as they leapt backwards from the ice wall. Their maneuverability began to suffer, and they had to land quickly. My baby! Hatsum cried, seeing the destroyed hover boot. From the ring of ice, the team of Siro, Mina, Aoyama, and Kirishima came charging towards them. Tokoyami commanded his dark shadow to attack them, but he was battled back by a blast from Aoyama's laser. As dark shadow was withdrawn, Midoriya instead unleashed a full blast from his flamethrower, diverting the oncoming attackers. He glanced at the timer. 30 seconds to go. They were still in third. They just needed to last a little bit longer. Suddenly, from the ice ring, two more teams came charging towards them, one of which being Shuji, Mineta, and Tsuyu, the other team being Todoroki, Ida, Momo, and Kaminari. Ida was leading his team with a burst of speed and closing in fast, but a blast of tape from Siro, a bunch of Mineta's sticky balls, and Tsuyu's tongue were closing in on the group fast. Oh shit! Tokoyami muttered, dropping the flowery speech. With only a few seconds remaining, Midoriya knew he just needed a quick defense. Everyone huddle. As they had discussed before the course began, they engaged in the last-ditch defensive effort. They crouched down together to keep low, and the telescopic spider legs erupted from Deku's pack. Except this time, he wrapped them around his three teammates' heads, and in front of him, creating an impromptu shield. It worked just in the nick of time as they could hear the balls, tongue, tape, and a few hands from Todoroki's team smack helplessly into the metal beams. But following this noise was the whistle signaling the end of the cavalry battle. As Midoriya unshielded his team, they all checked their headgear. "Mine's here." Uraraka cheered. "Mine too." Hatsum sighed. "I also still have my headband in my possession." Tokoyami confirmed. "And me too." Midoriya laughed in relief. He looked to the scoreboard. They sat in third place, causing him to laugh harder. Midnight took the stage to announce that the top 16 students would advance to the last stage of the sports festival, the battle tournament. Those rankings were: Team 1, Todoroki, Ida, Momo, and Kaminari. Team 2, Ibra, Tetsu, Hitoshi Shinso, and Kendo. Team 3, Midoriya, Uraraka, Hatsum, and Tokoyami. Team 4, Azui, Mineta, and Shuji. As this was only 15 people, the team of Shiro, Kirishima, Mina, and Aoyama, the fifth-place team, decided to volunteer Kirishima to go on to the tournament. Midoriya beamed at his teammates as they began congratulating each other for a job well done, but he was only half listening as he looked up at the scoreboard. "Now the real fun begins. Let's see how my babies can do in a fight." Suddenly, the board lit up, revealing the first fight in his line-up, Tokoyami. He looked up at his teammate, who gave him a competitive yet friendly smirk. "May the best man win," the bird-like boy said with a handshake. "Definitely," Midoriya replied. But in his head, the wheels were already turning on how he could checkmate the Dark Shadow quirk. Sitting in the waiting room, Izuku checked the matchups for the first round of fights. Himself versus Tokoyami. Hatsum versus Ida. Azui versus Kendo. Kirishima versus Tetsu. Mineta versus Uraraka. Todoroki versus Shuji. Kaminari versus Momo. Finally, Ibra versus Shinso. The possibilities of what he could face raced through his mind, but he stopped himself from scanning his notes. He needed to focus on his fight with Tokoyami. A knock on the door told him it was time, so he opened the door and made his way to the arena, strapping his goggles on. He stopped in his tracks for a second to marvel at the number 2 hero, Endeavor, talking to Todoroki. He couldn't hear what they were saying, but suddenly, Todoroki stormed off, angrily. "Probably nothing I need to worry about," Midoriya thought to himself as he stepped out into the arena to cheers. Neither of them seemed in the mood to chat. And introducing first, the incredible man-spider of support, Midoriya Izuku. Internally, he blanched at the nickname, but he supposed it fit. The only weapons he allowed himself to show in the early stages of the sports festival were the spider legs, flamethrowers, and grappling hooks. Now, he was ready to surprise the crowd with the rest of his toys. But he wanted to reveal them slowly. If he played all his cards in the first fight, he'd give an edge to his opponents. Tokoyami took the stage, as Present Mike introduced him as the terrifying bird of the underworld, and Midoriya was happy to see his former teammate was just as put off by his nickname as well. Midnight flagged the start of the match, and, as Midoriya had predicted, Tokoyami unleashed Dark Shadow towards him. In a swift motion, Deku pulled down his goggles and flicked down the visors. He hit a switch on his backpack strap and reached his other hand down to catch the small ball that dropped from it. He threw it towards Dark Shadow, who flew right into it with confidence. This was a mistake. The orb was an impact flash grenade. Blinding light filled the stadium, and Dark Shadow made a screech before retreating to Tokoyami, who was also blinded. Midoriya unleashed a wild grin as he charged through towards the defenseless hero, using his retractable armor plates to cover his arms. They finished expanding just in time for him to leap into the air and punch Tokoyami across the beak, flooring him. He jumped on top of the hero and held a flamethrower up to the bird-like boy's face threateningly. "Impossible," Tokoyami grunted. "How did you know Dark Shadow's weakness?" "Call it intuition." Midoriya replied. Incidentally, Intuition was the name of the flying drone Midoriya had invented to spy on Class 1A. Instinct was the drone that spied on Class 1B. Do you yield? Midoriya asked. Tokoyami sighed in defeat. I yield. And that was match 1. What a decisive victory for the support department. President Mike yelled. But he had a specific counter to his foe's quirk. He heard Aizawa add, let's see if that luck continues. Midoriya offered a hand up to Tokoyami, and the other boy graciously accepted. No hard feelings? Of course not. Good luck, Midoriya, Tokoyami conceded. Nice guy. Midoriya thought as he walked back towards the entrance hall to watch the other matches. As he was walking, he passed Hatsum, who just sked at him. What's that about? Midoriya asked, blushing. Don't you care about getting a good internship? Hatsum scolded. You finished that match way too fast. The whole point is to win, isn't it? Midoriya inquired, rubbing the back of his neck. Truthfully, the whole point of this in his mind was to make sure his gear could help get revenge on the sludge villain for murdering Kakin, but that wasn't something he was going to share with her. That was neither here nor there. His pink-haired friend rolled her eyes. We're advertising ourselves to these support tech companies. Go watch a pro support developer at work, Deku scrub. His eyes widened. No one had called him Deku since Bakugo. Still, she meant it in a friendly way, so he gave her a small smile, despite how uncomfortable he had become. Be by all means, show me how it's done. He climbed the stairs and ran into Uraraka, who was on her way down. Hey Midoriya. Good job winning round 1. She gave him a million-watt smile, and he smiled back. Thanks, Uraraka. Are you getting ready for your match? She clenched her fists up to her chest. You know it. The little perv won't know what hit him. He laughed. He wasn't used to having friends. The only one he really had growing up was Bakugo, who made fun of him all the time for being quirkless. Now all these people seemed to accept him. It was a very conflicting feeling. It distracted him from his goal. He snapped himself out of his thoughts. Then I look forward to taking you on later. Thanks, Midoriya. As he reached the stands, he sat next to Yukio and a few other support students as Ida announced he would be wearing some gear Hatsum had prepared for him. Immediately, Midoriya knew something suspicious was up. As the match began, his support rival produced a pair of speakers and proceeded to dodge Ida while giving an extended sales pitch for all the admittedly cool things she had prepared for the occasion. Midoriya groaned and buried his head in his hands. Hatsum, you sneaky devil? Finally, after a 10-minute sales pitch, she forfeit, much to his surprise. Ida stormed off the field after her, humiliated. He'll be all sorts of mad when I fight him. Guess she got what she wanted, Midoriya laughed, shaking his head. As he waited for the next match, Hatsum plopped down in the seat next to him, and like usual, slapped him on the back. I got a good look at the support executives in that box up there, she crowed, proudly. I'm going to get so many internship offers. Maybe even some contracts. My babies will belong to the world, Midoriya. The world? He smiled to her. You're something else, Hatsum. Azui and Kendo took the field, and that match was short but wild. Midoriya had to pick his jaw off the ground. In the opening moments, Azui used her tongue as a grappling hook, wrapped it around Kendo's knee, and rocketed herself towards the taller girl to deliver a dropkick. Not scot-free though, as the move connected, Kendo grew her fist to the size of her head to clobber Azui in the cheek. As both girls recovered, Kendo had charged, but Azui jumped over the girl, wrapped her tongue around Kendo's throat, and as the frog girl landed, she swung Kendo through the air and tossed her out of the ring. That was amazing. Midoriya squirmed. As the next match was beginning, he saw Azui Tsuyu walk into the section next to support with the rest of the class of 1A. She met his gaze and gave him a thumbs up. Nervously, Midoriya returned it. After 10 minutes of Kirishima and Tetsu fighting each other, Izuku decided to take a walk. As he wandered the halls, he saw Ida walk by briskly, while clutching his phone. He looked sad. What's that about? Midoriya pondered. I thought he'd be pissed about Hatsum. As he passed by the concession stand, he saw that Kirishima and Tetsu had punched themselves into a draw. He saw the next match on a television screen, which was not nearly as intense. Uraraka dodged all of Mineta's sticky balls and easily managed to float him out of the ring. He climbed back into his seat just in time for the beginning of Todoroki versus Shuji. "Did you get me my?" Hatsum began, before Midoriya handed her a tub of popcorn. "Thanks." He grinned to his friend. "No problem. You want some?" she asked, shoving a handful in her mouth. "Nah, I want to focus on the dash," Midoriya began, but he was interrupted as Todoroki unleashed a massive wall of ice, freezing Shuji in place and ending the match. "Fight?" Hatsum groaned. "I feel bad for whoever has to fight that guy." Hatsum laughed, but then realized that possibly included the boy sitting next to her. "No offense, Midoriya." Midoriya frowned. "How do I fight that?" He pondered this as Momo handily defeated Kaminari by producing an insulated suit to block his electric attack, and then tying him up with a rope while he was out of commission. Midoriya did focus on the next match, Ibra versus Shinso. He had never studied the general class student, so he was a wild card as far as quirks went. But as the match started, Shinso shouted something to Ibra. She replied in a demure tone, but suddenly her eyes went blank, and she marched herself out of the ring, getting disqualified. Some sort of voice-based brainwashing? Midoriya marveled, immediately pulling out his notebook and taking notes. "That's crazy powerful. You think he needs someone to talk for it to work?" Hatsum asked, not sure why else he shouted at her. "He'd have no problem beating you if that's the case," Midoriya teased. "You motormouth." Hatsum snorted with laughter. Down on the field, Kirishima and Tetsutetsu settled their draw with an arm wrestling match, won by the boy from Class 1A. "Was that a joke? Did you actually make a joke? Who are you and what did you do to my friend?" Midoriya laughed, but then let out a deep breath. "Well, time for round 2. Wish me luck." "Luck is for chumps. Go kick Ida's butt," Hatsum replied, giving him a broad grin. Midoriya walked down the stadium and onto the field to a chorus of cheers. As he was announced again by Present Mike, this time as the flame-throwing genius. It was better. Ida came to the field next, but he was different. It wasn't the humiliation either. He had a steely determination in his eyes, almost desperate to win. The bolus. He thought, "I just need to restrict his legs." "Go!" Izuku flicked the switch on his pack, but the bolus never made it to his hands before he was lifted off the ground and being pushed back towards the edge of the arena. Ida had closed the distance and tried to shove him out of the ring before he could catch his weapon. In a panic, Izuku raised his fist and punched Ida across the eye, making the taller boy drop him. He immediately deployed his spider legs, which sunk into the pavement, and just barely prevented him from leaving the ring. Ida was charging again, but Midoriya used his enhancements to leap over Ida, and used the distance he created to deploy the armor plates across his arms. As he landed, he attacked Ida with the flamethrowers, but Ida had already charged to the side and began circles strafing Midoriya, looking for an opening. "Damn it," Midoriya cursed, "I'll never be able to restrain his legs this way." He ceased the attack with the flamethrowers. He didn't want to run out of fuel with 2 fights after this. As soon as the flames stopped though, Ida charged again, kicking Midoriya across the jaw before he could defend himself. Flipping through the air, Midoriya spun himself so that his spider legs planted themselves into the ground and kept him suspended in the air. "I need a new strategy. Didn't want to use these until the next fight, but I'm not going to make it at this rate." He used one flamethrower again to put Ida on the defensive, but as he did, he flicked another switch on his pack and grabbed a cryogenic grenade. He dropped the flames, and Ida charged again. Izuku threw the ice grenade at the arena floor, creating a large sheet of ice. Ida immediately lost balance and slipped towards Midoriya. Midoriya planted his feet on the ground. Spider augmentation. Combat mode. Midoriya's spider legs shifted into clawed tentacles, snapping as they hovered around his sides, and lunged forward, grabbing Ida's arms and legs. "What?" Ida shouted, suddenly completely restrained by his appendages, and held a foot off the ground. "Good night," Midoriya said with a rather unhinged look. He flicked open another compartment on his armed gauntlets, and 2 tasers flew out. Sparks flew as Midoriya shocked Ida, and after a few moments, the support student dropped the motionless hero course student to the ground. That's the match. Midnight called. The crowd cheered as Midoriya caught his breath and retracted his weaponry. Still, as he walked back towards the stands, he felt his confidence begin to surge. Fighting against quirks was tricky, but not impossible. I wish I could see Aizawa's face right now. Power Loader laughed. That bushy-haired pyromaniac knocked out his class president. All Might folded his hands across his face. He wouldn't admit it to Power Loader, but he was becoming invested in these results as well. Midoriya exhaustedly plopped next to Hatsum, expecting some sort of witty remark. It never came. You okay there, Deku Scrub? Hatsum asked after a few moments of silence. What? Izuku asked, confused. And since when did you start calling me Deku Scrub? Because your head looks like a bush, like the Zelda bad guys. And you know what I mean. I've never seen your face get like that when you aren't inventing. Hatsum replied. You were in the zone like I've never seen you before. I was. Midoriya asked. If I didn't know any better, I'd think you were trying to get into the hero course. She said, thought her smile was definitely more sad than usual. Midoriya thought about those words as he watched the next bout, Kirishima and Azui. The two took to the stage. This time, Tsuyu's battle strategy was much more defensive. Kirishima had rushed in to use his hardening quirk to go on the offensive. But Tsuyu had no problem leaping over the tall boy, or sticking her tongue to the floor and using it as a pivot to swing herself around. As Midoriya had noted from his spying, Kirishima wore out over time, and as he began to pant, Azui struck. First, she spat some sort of chemical at him, a low-level poison, Midoriya had learned, stinging his eyes. With Kirishima stunned, Azui used her move from the last fight, wrapping her tongue around the knee as an anchor, and launching herself into a powerful dropkick, knocking Kirishima out of the ring. And that's the match. Azui Tsuyu advances to the semifinals. Midnight announced. Oh man, you get to fight that girl you were flirting with during the race. Hatsum jeered, nudging her friend in the ribs. Midoriya turned a bright red and rubbed the back of his neck. I wasn't flirting. What else do you think she could do with that tongue if you were dating? Hatsum cackled as Midoriya covered his face with his hands. Hatsum, oh my god. He pleaded, see, cut that out. This was a weird feeling for Midoriya. He hadn't been part of real friendship in a long, long time. It felt both foreign and familiar, like coming home after years of being away. Uraraka and Todoroki took the stage next. Midoriya and Hatsum leaned forward. After Todoroki's last match, they were anxious to see if Uraraka could combat his quirk. She had a good start. Knowing he would send a wall of ice at her like he did Shuji, she levitated herself over it and began sliding down the ice, looking to close in on him to float him. Todoroki blocked her from him using a wall of ice, but she smacked it. With both of her hands, dislodging the ice blockade and floating it a few inches off the ground, she began pushing against it, trying to knock Todoroki out of the ring with his own ice. The boy jumped backwards and reached to the ground, creating a precision trail of ice that traveled under the blockade and creeping up Uraraka's leg. Frozen against the floor, Uraraka dropped the ice wall. She desperately tried to dislodge her leg, but the ice anchor was too rooted to the floor and too heavy for her to dislocate. Todoroki rushed around the ice wall and used his quirk to immobilize Uraraka. But as the match ended, Midoriya noticed something. Is he slowing down the more he uses his quirk? He asked, nudging Hatsum. She used her quirk to focus on the Class 1A boy. What? His arms are frosting up. Maybe the ice stuff wears on him after a while? They exchanged glances. Think you could use that? Hatsum asked. Maybe, Midoriya replied, rubbing his chin. I'm heading down to the waiting room during this next match. Get in the zone. Gotta psych yourself up for fighting your girlfriend? Hatsum laughed. I'm pulling for you, Deku Scrub. He rolled his eyes but smiled. Thanks. He walked down to the waiting room and opened the door to room A, but walked into Uraraka on the phone with someone in tears. Thanks, Dad, she said, rubbing her eyes and hanging up. She looked up to see the support student, and she blushed. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to, Midoriya stuttered, but she shook her head. It's okay. She sniffled. Hey, good luck out there. She rushed past him and he frowned. Alright, so, the frog quirk, how do I? He looked up at the monitor and saw the match between Momo and Shinso was already over. Momo had silently created a muzzle for herself, negating the general class boy's brainwashing. She then used a net to trap him. Guess I'll just have to wing it, Midoriya grimaced, grabbing his battle backpack. And for the first battle of the semifinals, the support spider of ice and fire, Midoriya Izuzuokoku. What? Midoriya deadpanned. And his opponent, the phenomenal frog of the hero class 1A, Azui saw Midoriya and waved to him in a friendly way, making his stomach churn. Wish I could invent something for that feeling in my gut is. Gee, good luck, Azui. Call me Tsu, Midoriya-chan. Midoriya asked, blushing. Oh, how adorable. Midnight gushed from the judge's podium. Now fight. Stunned from her request to call her by her first name, Midoriya left himself open as she went for her opening move, wrapping her frog tongue around Midoriya's leg. His knee buckled as she launched toward him, snapping him out of his trance. He was able to call out his spider legs and wrap them around him as a shield, and as Tsuyu collided with them, he pushed them out to launch her back. It won't work, he yelled, defiantly. In the air, Tsuyu spat some poison at him, so Izuku rolled out of the way. He grabbed an ice grenade from his pack, he just needed to rest-ine her with it. But before he could throw it, Tsuyu's tongue wrapped his hand, locking it in place. This time, she pulled him towards her, his ice grenade clattering helpless against the concrete arena. Thankfully, the impact wasn't enough to set it off. Before he could react, Tsuyu spun around and kicked Midoriya across the side of the face, sending him crashing along the floor. With her tongue still wrapped around his wrist, she pulled him back to do it again. No! Midoriya grunted, spinning himself up and using his spider legs to grip into the arena floor, stopping her pull on her. Steadied, he gave a great tug, pulling Tsuyu towards him. Unprepared for this, Midoriya lifted his foot and unceremoniously booted her in the forehead. With her grip on his arm broken, he used his front spider leg to clutch her ankle and throw her towards the ring out. Tsuyu spun in the air and managed to land inbounds, but Midoriya took the moment to plate his arms with the telescopic armor and aimed his flamethrowers at her. He unleashed a flame burst, but she jumped right over the flame and came crashing right down towards him, looking to stomp on him with her powerful leg muscles. He jumped out of the way with his spider tech, but as she landed, she used her tongue to grab the nearest spider leg and yanked on it. The power of her tongue was shocking as he was pulled off balance and crashed to the floor for the second time. Tsuyu lunged for him, but Midoriya pulled his legs under his chest and sprung himself up, shifting his spider legs to a combat state and striking at the girl. But she shifted her body to slip right past the tentacles and drop-kicked Midoriya dead in the chest. Wind knocked out of him, Midoriya realized he needed to adapt his strategy. His light was blocked as Tsuyu jumped towards him, looking to stomp down on him again. He rolled back into a crouch as Tsuyu landed in front of him, and Midoriya connected with a left hook with his armored gauntlets, sending Tsuyu sprawling across the ground, but she rolled into another crouching position. Midoriya used a flame burst, but Tsuyu jumped to the side. As she moved, he saw the discarded cryogenic grenade on the ground behind where she had been. He only had 3 more in his backpack, but he wanted to conserve them. He needed that one on the ground. He looked up to Tsuyu and saw she, like him, was panting, the fight beginning to wear on her too. Still, she shot her tongue out once again, snagging his leg, and launched herself towards him. This time, Midoriya was ready, pivoting his hips as she came close, using one arm to wrap around her legs, and his other hand to grab her head and shove her into the floor with his gauntlets. With Tsuyu stunned, he jumped over her and dove for his grenade. But as he got close, she recovered and wrapped her tongue around both of his legs. He fell to the ground, and in desperation, used his spider legs to grab the grenade and pull it back to himself. Midoriya turned onto his back as Tsuyu charged close, and threw the grenade at her feet. It exploded, wrapping Azui Tsuyu in a barrier of ice. Midoriya caught his breath as she was immobilized, but there was sounds of alarm coming from Midnight and Class 1A amidst the cheering crowds. The match is over, we need to get her out of there now. Midnight yelled as she charged over. Midoriya was confused, but then looked at Tsuyu and gasped. Despite the thin layer, her skin was turning dangerously blue. Tsu. She's cold-blooded. Midnight yelled toward Cementos. We need to get her to Recovery Girl, right away. Cold-blooded? Midoriya realized. Shit. He hadn't realized the ice was potentially lethal to her from his recon. A part of Midoriya that had been buried resurfaced immediately, the need to save others. He smashed the ice apart with one punch of his gauntlets, scooped Azuitsu into his arms, and charged into the back arena on his spider legs. Alright, now that is some adorable chivalrous stuff. Midnight said to Cementos, who just rolled his eyes. You're incorrigible. Cementos sighed. I don't know the meaning of the word. Midnight crowed. It was true. She didn't. The run to the medical center happened in blur as Midoriya held Tsuyu close to him in an attempt to share body heat. If he ended up hurting someone, especially an innocent, especially someone who had been nothing but friendly to him during his field testing, he would never forgive himself. Please be okay, he repeated over and over to himself. He burst into the medical office, startling Recovery Girl. Oh my! You got her here fast, didn't you? The elderly hero asked. Weiss, Midoriya panted. Please, I didn't know she was cold-blooded. You have to help her, please. Recovery Girl looked down into his arms and chuckled. I think you fixed her up, dear. Wha? Midoriya asked, looking down to Tsuyu, who looked completely awake, looking up at him with a very red face. UWH? Once you got me out of the ice, your body heat got me back to normal on the run over here, Karo, Tsuyu explained, avoiding his gaze. Why you can put me down now, Karo? This is a little embarrassing. Midoriya immediately set the girl down and retracted his spider augmentations. Recovery Girl chuckled as the two teenagers blushed at each other. Guess that means I lost, huh? Tsuyu sighed. Midoriya nodded while rubbing the back of his neck. Why, I didn't know you were cold-blooded. I'm sorry. Don't be, Karo, Tsuyu said, turning back to him. Your weapons are very resourceful. And like you said, you didn't know. No harm done, Karo. Thanks. I guess I should go get ready. Who knows when my match with the winner of Todoroki and Momo will be, Midoriya muttered. He turned to leave, but Tsuyu reached out and grabbed his arm, turning him even redder. Wait. Midoriya turned. To his shock, Tsuyu used her tongue to poke his cheek. Good luck. I'll be rooting for you. And thanks for rushing me here, Karo. Thanks to Tsu. Midoriya stuttered, backing up to leave the room, tripping over his own feet and knocking a garbage can over, getting up, picking up the can awkwardly and leaving. Recovery Girl and Azui exchanged glances. Oh, he's into you, Recovery Girl advised. Karo, Tsuyu replied, turning crimson again. Stumbling his way into the hallway, he heard an eruption of cheers. And that's the match. Present mic boomed. Todoroki advances to the finals to take on Midoriya. We'll let the boys rest for 15 minutes before the final showdown. If Midoriya wasn't already nerve-wracked from having held a girl, which he was, his insides churned further from the time limit imposing on him. As he wandered the halls towards the waiting room, he overheard another conversation. Why do you refuse my power? That was Endeavor, Midoriya realized, pressing himself against the corner. I reject you, father. Todoroki yelled. What? Midoriya thought. That's his dad. I will win this fight using only my right side. Todoroki added, storming off. Midoriya ducked into a bathroom as Todoroki stormed past. Does he have two quirks? What the hell? Midoriya pondered. He had no time to sit around and consider though, it was time for his fight. He had looked for the waiting room for so long, he had no time to sit now. He stepped into the arena to a chorus of cheers. Midoriya was so nervous, he didn't even hear what terrible nickname Present Mike had given him, which is for the best, it was Mechanical Arachnid. Todoroki took the stage, and Midoriya stood at the ready, knowing what he needed first. The signal was given, and Midoriya deployed a simple incendiary explosive. He threw the grenade 10 feet in front of him as Todoroki went for the ice wall he started all his matches with. The explosion hollowed out a crevice in the ice, and Midoriya deployed his arm guards, using the flamethrowers to cut a path the ice wall. With only a thin layer left, he clutches his spider legs to the side of the tunnel. "Here goes nothing," Midoriya said through gritted teeth. He lunged himself through the sheet of ice, punching through with his gauntlet, and went to stomp Todoroki with his spider enhancements, a move he picked up in his last fight. Todoroki lifted his right arm for more ice, but Midoriya shot a small burst of flames that burnt Todoroki's hand, making him back up and withdraw it. As Midoriya landed, barely missing Todoroki, he swung for Todoroki with his armored fists. Todoroki kept backpedaling away, so after a missed right hook, Midoriya mashed a button on his backpack with his left hand. A telescopic Acrisma stick rolled through a chute on his arm and into his left palm. Todoroki was still expecting a punch, but Midoriya flicked the weapon open and smashed the taller boy across the cheek with the metal rod, producing a satisfying clang noise. As Todoroki stumbled backwards, Midoriya armed himself with another Acrisma stick so that he was dual-wielding. Todoroki raised his arms to defend, but Midoriya swooped low using his spider legs and blasted Todoroki across the side of the knee, knocking the taller boy to the ground. Todoroki turned on his side and sent a blast of ice towards Midoriya, but he used his tech to leap away defensively. Todoroki climbed to his feet and again sent wave after wave of ice at his challenger, but Midoriya leapt away time and time again, even able to cling to the side of the original ice wall with the clawed ends of his spider legs. He clacked his Acrisma sticks together tauntingly, signaling that he was ready to throw down. Watching carefully, he saw Todoroki's right side begin to frost up, and he seemed sluggish. Midoriya snatched another cryogenic grenade from his backpack and hurled it at Todoroki. In his haze, the hero-class student went to freeze the grenade, but that caused it to explode, hitting him with a blast of ice and frost, pushing him backwards. Midoriya advanced and saw Todoroki was beginning to shiver, lips turning blue. Todoroki raised his right arm again, but Midoriya was faster, pouncing on Todoroki, grabbing his forehead with a spider leg, and slamming Todoroki's head down into the pavement. Midoriya raised an Acrisma stick over the hero-class boy's head. "Yield," Midoriya commanded. A tear ran down Todoroki's scarred eye, much to Midoriya's confusion. "I'm sorry, Mom." Midoriya furrowed his brow in confusion. "I'm not your mom." He looked down to see Todoroki's left hand was raised, and then suddenly wreathed in flames. Shit. Midoriya jumped away, but not in enough time to prevent the flames from licking his face. As he landed on the wall of ice, he rubbed his face, trying to quell the feeling of the burn and the smell of burnt flesh. He looked up through teary eyes to see Todoroki had gotten to his feet. Rage welled up inside of Midoriya. "You have two quirks?" Todoroki shot a burst of flame at Midoriya, who was able to leap away this time. "What are you doing?" Midoriya screamed as the Todoroki's bursts of flames began to melt the ice around the arena. 2 cryogenic grenades left. Midoriya deployed one, leapt over Todoroki, and used the burst of ice to freeze Todoroki's left side. Todoroki struggled, but was able to summon enough flames to burst through the barrier. Midoriya had lunged for him, planted his front 2 spider legs, and used them swing forward and dropkick the older boy in the stomach, knocking him backwards. "Who do you think you are?" Izuku yelled in a fury, beating Todoroki above his right eye with an Acrisma stick. "Where do you get off half-assing it in this tournament?" In his daze, Todoroki raised his right arm to freeze Midoriya, but the shorter boy raised his own arm and battled it back with his flamethrower at point-blank range, causing the hero to scream in pain. "I went my whole life wanting to be a hero," Midoriya screamed, abandoning his weaponry and slugging Todoroki across the jaw. "But I'm just some quirkless wannabe. Do you know how many people like me would kill to be as strong as you?" Todoroki raised his arms, but Deku grabbed both of his hands, stepped forward and headbutt Todoroki, dazing them both. Todoroki recovered first though, using a burst of flame to force Midoriya away. "How dare you!" Todoroki seethed, wiping blood off his cheek. "This fire is my curse." Blood boiling, Midoriya planted himself in front of Todoroki and threw his last cryo grenade. "You don't deserve to call yourself hero." Todoroki used his left arm to burn the cryo grenade to ash, but this was Midoriya's plan, as he reached through the fire with his spider tentacle to grab the left wrist of Todoroki and pivoted on his hip to judo toss the taller boy. But in mid-air, Todoroki created a slide of ice to put some distance between himself and the crazed support student. Cementos spoke into his headset, "This is getting pretty bad. Do we stop them?" Midnight hesitated as she watched. Midoriya flicked his flamethrowers, but his eyes widened for a split second in panic as they clicked uselessly. He was out of fuel. He came back his senses as a flame from Todoroki cut through the air towards him. He jumped out of the way and grabbed another flash grenade from his backpack. He pulled down his visor and threw the grenade, but Todoroki froze it before it could hit the ground. Cursing, Midoriya grabbed his last two weapons, another pair of restraining bolas and another flash grenade. Strafing around Todoroki, he threw the light grenade, but as Todoroki went to freeze it, Midoriya threw the restraining bolas low. They wrapped around Todoroki's legs and snapped them together. Todoroki lost balance and fell to the ground. Midoriya pounced, landing on top of Todoroki and holding a spider tentacle threateningly up to his face. "Yield!" Midoriya yelled. Instead, Todoroki placed his hands, both of them, on Midoriya's chest. "I'm sorry," he muttered. Before Midoriya knew what hit him, Todoroki unleashed the full force of both his left and right side, blasting the shorter boy off of him. Next thing he knew, Midoriya had smashed against the grass outside of the ring. "Damn it," Midoriya coughed before passing out. A few hours later, Midoriya coughed himself awake in the medical wing of the school. "Awake? Are you?" Recovery girl asked, looking up from her computer. "Yes." Midoriya rubbed his head, remembering what happened. I lost." "No," came a gruff voice from his left. He jumped and turned to see Power Loader was there. The hero reached over from his chair and gently grabbed his pupil's shoulder. "You came in second. Do you know when the last time a support student made it to the finals, kid?" Midoriya shook his head. 20 damn years," Power Loader laughed. "You did awesome, kid. I was right about you. I just wanted to make sure you were okay. Also, thanks to you, I won a bet with ectoplasm and got $20. "Thanks, sir," Midoriya said, rubbing his neck. "I wanted to win it all, but—" Power Loader clapped him on the shoulder. "Kid, that Todoroki is the strongest in Class 1A and the son of the number 2 hero, Endeavor. And you took him to the limit more than any of his classmates could. You're a tough son of a bitch and I'm damn proud of you. Get some rest and go home. You have some more visitors after me." "I do?" Midoriya asked, confused. Power Loader smirked as he left the room, holding the door open for Azui Tsuyu. "Azui?" Midoriya asked. "What are you doing here?" "I told you to call me Tsu." She deadpanned. "Right, sorry." Midoriya scolded himself. "Well, you brought me here after our fight," she explained. "I thought I should come make sure you're okay too." Midoriya blushed but smiled. "Thanks, Sartsu. I'm okay, just a little sore. Sorry I couldn't pull off the win after you said you were pulling for me." Tsuyu turned to look at him, her expression shifting very slightly to surprise. "You don't need to apologize to me, that was maybe the coolest fight any of us have ever seen." Midoriya laughed and rubbed the back of his neck. "I'm glad you enjoyed it." "Of course," she replied, smiling slightly. "Don't be so hard on yourself. Like all that stuff you were yelling during your fight." "The stuff I was yelling?" he asked. "You called yourself a quirkless nobody, that you wanted to be a hero?" Tsuyu replied, looking to the floor. "Huh? I was so in the zone I didn't realize I had said all that," Midoriya admitted, scratching his nose. "I guess that probably sounded really weird." "Not at all." Tsuyu reached over and grabbed his hand. "You were awesome out there, I'm just glad you're okay." "But Midoriya-chan?" "Yeah?" he asked. She poked his tongue with her cheek again. "You're definitely not a quirkless nobody." Thanks." Midoriya stammered out, redder than his boots. She beamed. "I should get going. See you Monday?" Midoriya beamed back at her. "Definitely." She smiled at him as she left. Recovery girl looked up at him once she was sure Tsuyu was out of earshot and said, "Oh, she's into you. You should take her for ice cream." Midoriya buried his head in his hands. "Oh my god." He jumped up as Hatsum kicked the door open. "What are his vitals? Is he okay?" She screamed, before seeing Midoriya sitting upright and staring right at him. "Oh good, you're okay. Hatsum, what are you, UWH?" He blurted out as his rival wrapped him in a hug. "I was worried, duh," she replied, pulling off him. "You were blasted 3 stories into the air and bounced off the ground." "People don't bounce, Deku scrub." "You bounced?" She made a bouncing motion with her hands. Boing. His cheeks burned again, but he laughed. "I've never seen you worry about anything that's not one of your babies." Hatsum laughed, but turned a little red. "I can't have you dying on me before I prove myself as the superior inventor." Her tone turned more somber as she looked down at the burn marks that were still evident on his neck, and, "I suppose I don't want anything to happen to you either." Midoriya's cheeks were tinged with pink. "Thanks, that means a lot to me." All right, Recovery Girl groaned. "I think he's had enough visitors for now. He needs rest. And quiet." She finished the demand with a glare. Hatsum rolled her eyes, but obliged and left. But as she did, All Might entered the room, and once the pink-haired support student had left, took his depowered form. "Does he have time for just one more?" the number 1 hero asked. Midoriya's heart leapt into his throat. Recovery Girl just sighed. "Make it quick." "All Might?" Midoriya asked, shocked. What are you doing here, sir?" All Might gave him a small smile. "Young Midoriya, we should talk." As Midoriya laid in his bed at home that night, he replayed his discussion with All Might in his mind, absent-mindedly turning his silver medal over in his fingers as his mind drifted. "Young Midoriya, I owe you an apology," All Might said, not able to look the boy in the eyes. Midoriya was stunned. "Sir?" "You see," All Might sighed, "the day I saw you, and you lost your friend, I haven't been able to stop thinking about it. I let you both down that day." "What?" Midoriya asked. "But it's my fault the bottle fell out of your pocket?" All Might looked at him, incredulously. "That's not your fault, Midoriya. I should have been more careful. And I couldn't bring myself to save that boy. I was there, but felt powerless to act." Midoriya stared at his feet at the end of the bed. He wanted to cry, but he couldn't. All Might was blaming himself for the same thing he had been, after all this time. "You're wrong. If I had just let you go." All Might walked over and grabbed the boy's shoulder. "Neither of us knew that would happen," he said calmly. "Please don't carry that burden, my boy. Your friend died because someone evil decided to take a life. You cannot blame yourself for the decisions of others, or my indecision to act." Midoriya closed his eyes. It wasn't that easy, but he knew All Might was right. Even after all this time, All Might was still his hero, even if he didn't want to admit it. All Might continued, "I told you that you could never be a hero, when I had failed as a hero." "What are you saying?" Midoriya asked, heart pounding in his ears. He had thought being a hero impossible, but this speech was tugging at emotions he had buried long ago. "I'm saying you impressed me today, Midoriya. And I want you to keep honing your skills in support, because I think you have a knack for it. But if you continue to keep that heroic spirit, with how you fight, with how you rush to save that girl, maybe you could be a hero." All Might finished. He handed Midoriya his silver medal. "You ranked higher than most of an entire first year of powerful quirks. You should be proud. I hope one day you can forgive me." "But how could I be a hero in the support course?" Midoriya asked. "Your mind and inventions got you this far," the pro explained. "If you grow at this rate, you could easily use it to pass a hero licensing exam after graduation. The hero course wouldn't do that. It's designed to teach potential heroes to improve their quirks. That's why I think you'd do well to stay in support for the time being. They wouldn't know what to do with you in Class 1A or B." Midoriya frowned to his feet, but did admit, "That makes a lot of sense." All Might looked away. He was conflicted. As it was now, Mirio was poised to inherit One for All. But something about this kid made him feel like he'd be a good candidate. Still, he didn't know enough to be sure. "I'll be keeping an eye on you, Midoriya," All Might said, smiling. "Keep growing." He walked over and handed the boy a silver medal. "You were out cold for the ceremony, but this belongs to you. Congratulations. You've done something no one thought possible." Midoriya stared at the piece of metal in his hand. All Might's words had given him hope. But he was not prepared to focus on pursuing that yet. He set the medal down next to him and walked over to his desk, flicking on the lamp. He opened his laptop and found a few articles about the sludge villain. Using a combination of Bakugo's quirk and his own sludge powers, he had been the prime suspect in various drug smuggling operations. This was a big step up from your regularly robbery or theft, but it drew more attention. He was getting sloppy, perhaps either from laziness or overconfidence. These rings were always held at docks. Midoriya turned to a map he had pinned to a cork board and began circling the locations of all the drug busts, looking for a pattern. Getting closer, Midoriya muttered, not noticing anything predictive in the behavior. He had finished an IP address encryptor, which he used to access the deep web untraceably. Not too happy with the amount of smut and gore, he searched the dark side of the internet for any chatter on the sludge villain or the foreign drug. After an hour of ignoring advertisements for a red room, he made a side note to send the links anonymously to the authorities. He found something. A lead. He matched the coordinates to his map, a dock that wasn't already busted. And it was a few weeks out. He cracked a grin, but then saw the All Might figure on his desk. He frowned and turned the figure away. Sorry, All Might, I can't be a hero quite yet, Midoriya muttered, grimly. I have something I need to do. He set to work making some cryogrenades. He'd need more. We'll need to make sure all you guys are in top shape for the party, Midoriya said, glancing at his backpack. We'll need to come out swinging. All right, you grease monkeys, Power Loader greeted on Monday morning. We had a good showing at the sports festival. And by we, I mostly mean the two madmen in the back. He gestured back to where Midoriya and Hatsum were already tinkering with some new gadgets, which means, we got internship opportunities out the ass. I'll pass out your options, you'll all be taking one. And of course, we have a few requests just for the two nut jobs in the back since they made it to the battle phase. Hatsum grinned at Midoriya. What did I tell you, Deku Scrub? I'm going to make a mint selling my tech. A mint. Just think, she was practically giddy at the thought. Soon I'll be making gear for the top 10 heroes. Midoriya couldn't help but grin at her enthusiasm. We'll see about that. He jumped as Power Loader placed a large stack of papers on his desk. 50 offers, Midoriya, Power Loader huffed. I would say it's a new record, but? Midoriya asked, confused. Power Loader guffawed. I think you scared a few of the tech heads out there that have never seen a fight. He dropped a stack of paper just slightly larger onto Hatsum's desk. She got 55 offers. That's the record. Yes. Hatsum cheered, fist pumping. I'm going to make so many new babies this week. What? Midoriya yelled, in disbelief. I think some of the spectators thought you were a bit nuts in that last battle, Power Loader chuckled. But you both broke the older record of 35. And that was 20 years ago. Good job. As he walked away, Midoriya looked over to Hatsum, rubbing one of her gadgets against her cheek and cooing, I'm so proud of you. And they thought I was the crazy one, Midoriya mumbled. He began shuffling through the papers as Power Loader announced. Have these back to me by Wednesday. You'll be working with these tech developers for a week, and you'll see how they work in their specialized fields, so choose carefully. Midoriya's eyes snapped upwards. Then he shuffled the papers, looking for addresses instead of technical specializations or the facility specs. Finally he found one. It was a block away. A week. Next week. A smile crept up his lips. He had found his internship. Wait, who is this with Undersea Limited? He wondered to himself. Specializing in oceanographic tech for aqua-based heroes. Well, I'd be out of my element, he realized, but maybe it couldn't hurt to expand my horizons. He scanned the location again. Besides, the whole point is to be at that dock Friday night. It's time, he whispered. It's 10:45, why? Yukio replied, mishearing him. Never mind. Thanks, Midoriya replied. Maybe I'm going a little crazy. I'm telling you, Deku Scrub, I don't know who to pick, Hatsum half bragged, half contemplated. I've got it narrowed down to 3. She shoved her sandwich into her mouth. Deku rolled his eyes. The 3 you've picked all specialize in pro-hero suit enforcement, repair, and upgrades. I'm sure any of them would be good. That's what makes it so hard, duh. You sure you want to learn about Aquatech? Hatsum asked. High seas heroes use a lot of espionage and stakeouts. You seem like more of, she held up her sandwich like a gun, pew pew, bang bang, type guy with your tech. I just want to learn new things. Can't be a one-trick pony, he answered when he looked up at the Class 1A table. Everyone there looked much more solemn that day. No one was talking. As he scanned their faces, Tsuyu looked up and met his gaze. He gave her a small smile, but she frowned and looked back to her food. Hey, did something happen to that hero class? Hatsum shrugged. I don't keep tabs on your girlfriend, you creep. She's not Midoriya began but stopped himself. I was just wondering why they all looked so down. Hey Izuku, came a voice from his other side, making him jump. He relaxed and smiled as he saw Uraraka though. You noticed, huh? Yeah, why is everyone looking so upset? He asked. Hatsum leaned over as well, curiosity perked. Well, it's about Ida? Uraraka asked. And his brother. What about him? Hatsum and Midoriya asked in unison. Uraraka looked around to make sure no one was listening. Ida doesn't talk about it much, but his older brother is the pro hero, Ingenium, and well, you probably saw the news over the weekend. It took a second for him to realize what she meant, but when he did he looked at Hatsum and they gasped. Stain. Midoriya blurted out. Uraraka hushed. I probably shouldn't be saying this but, yeah. Stain crippled Ingenium. He's taking it pretty bad. He couldn't even pick a hero name today. Ida and Midoriya hadn't talked much, but still, Midoriya couldn't help but feel awful for the taller boy. After all, he knew what it was like to lose someone to a villain. Should I say something? Midoriya asked. I wouldn't. He seems like he wants to. Oh no. What is she doing? Uraraka whisper screamed. Deku whipped around to see Hatsum walking over to Ida. He couldn't hear what she was saying, but she was awkwardly rubbing the back of her neck as they spoke, and Ida looked equally as uncomfortable. So does everyone know? Midoriya asked, turning away from the awkward confrontation. Uraraka shook her head. Oh. Todoroki is absent today too, and no one knows why. Between the two things, everyone is all messed up. Midoriya played with his food. Todoroki had said some weird things about his fire being a curse, and seemed pretty messed up about using his fire at the sports festival. At the time he hadn't thought much of it, but looking back, there were some red flags there. Anyway, I never got to say, congratulations on second place. Uraraka said, giving him her bright smile. You're tougher than you look. He smiled back. I certainly hope so. I'll need it for my internship. The week came and went, and Midoriya anxiously boarded the bus Monday morning with his backpack full. He had added a utility pouch on the front between the straps. The dispenser in the back was cool, but too impractical to have to reach behind him to grab the weapons from the air. A lesson well learned from the sports festival. Just need to make it through the week. Then it will be time. He thought to himself. Midoriya-chan? Came a croaky voice from a few seats down, making him jump. Peering down the aisle, he saw Tsuyu sitting alone. As it was earlier than most people would be up on a Monday, there wasn't a large crowd. She pat the seat next to her, signaling him to go over to her. Nervously, Midoriya took a deep breath and slid over to the chair next to her. Good morning, Azui. Tsuyu didn't even have to say it, she just gave him a look and Midoriya winced. Sorry. Good morning, Tsu. She gave a small chuckle. Good morning, Midoriya. What are you doing taking a bus to the docks this time of day, Karo? Oh, I have an internship with Undersea Limited, he explained. I probably don't have to tell you flamethrowers don't work underwater, Tsuyu replied, a hint of teasing in her usually monotonous voice. He smirked. So I've heard. I picked this so I could expand my horizons a little. Don't want to be a one-trick pony, you know? That's smart, the rainy season heroine replied. Uraraka said the same thing about interning with Gunhead, said she wanted to learn how to fight better. He's definitely a good person to learn where to fight from. Speaking of, where did you learn all those cool moves from? Midoriya asked. You're an awesome fighter. She beamed. A lot of hero training with All Might, and a lifetime of having to wrangle my younger siblings. My parents work all the time, so I take care of them a lot. Helps being able to snag them quickly. The perks of siblings, Midoriya laughed. I was an only child. So where are you off to so early? I work best in water, so I decided to intern with pro hero Selkie patrolling the seas in this area. Tsuyu explained, I guess you could say I decided to stay in my element. That sounds amazing. Midoriya gushed. Selkie is a legend as far as the seas goes. He's been at it for over 20 years. He'd be in the top 15 if there was more crime out there. No one trusts anyone more with their cargo and… Midoriya, you're muttering, Tsuyu pointed out. It's a bit creepy, Karo. Sorry, he apologized, blushing. I kinda get all otaku about pros. I think it's the whole no quirk thing. Tsuyu laughed, to his relief. That makes sense. I really don't think you need to do. You're quite the fighter yourself, Karo. He liked her laugh. It was like a bunch of playful ribbits. The bus came to a halt as they reached the docks, and the two UA students climbed off. I'm going to be at sea for the week, but if I'm back here at a good time, do you want to ride the bus back together Friday, Midoriya-chan? Tsuyu asked. Heat rose to Midoriya's cheeks at the frank question. It depends, but I'd like that. I think I'll be working late Friday night, so we'll see. She smiled. Well, let's hope. You're nice to talk to. Good luck, Midoriya. Why you too? As she walked off, Deku took a deep breath. Ignore the butterflies, Midoriya. You've got a hunt to finish. The week was by no means a waste of his time. Undersea tech was a level of expertise he was not accustomed to, and he picked up a few useful tidbits of knowledge. Most importantly, waterproofing his gear, which would even be helpful at keeping sludge out. Still, as he left the company Friday afternoon with high praise for his hard work and bright mind, he definitely knew that undersea tech was not where his passion lied. The only weaponry worth anything was harpoon tech, torpedoes, or people who had quirks that worked with water. Not to say it wasn't fascinating, but there were definitely times he was wondering how Hatsum was doing working on costumes for the pros. He got out of the line of sight of the building as the sun began to set, and then ducked behind an old building into an alleyway. He deployed his arm guards and used his grappling hook to propel up to the decrepit rooftop of the building, then used it to sling himself up to a taller building, continuing this pattern until he could look out at the docks. Midoriya looked at his notes. According to them, the sludge bastard would be meeting his suppliers in less than an hour. Patiently waiting, it wasn't long before Midoriya's plan was turned on its head. The police rolled up to the docks, a full squadron. Curiosity piqued, he pulled down his goggles and zoomed in, a feature he had learned from Hatsum. They were all just waiting. For what? To scare off the transfer? His questions were answered shortly after, as a boat came into the dock. Crouching behind the ledge of the building, Midoriya zoomed in on his goggles and immediately cursed his tunnel vision. Captain Selkie and his crew were turning over drug smugglers to the authorities. Of course, he cursed. After that whole rant I went on to Tsu, I should have figured Captain Selkie would catch these drug smugglers. Cursing to himself more, he swept the area visually for any sign of the spiky blonde hair of his former childhood friend. Nothing found. He did see Tsu though, and admittedly, it did cheer him up to see Selkie pat her on the back and a bunch of the police officers shake her hand. He couldn't tell what they were saying, but it became pretty clear that Tsuyu had played a big part in helping apprehend the drug smugglers. As mad as he was about his plan getting ruined, that was pretty cool for her. An officer offered to drive the heroine home, and as she got in the car, the contraband was loaded into an armored truck. The two vehicles housing these left separately from the rest of the squad, who dispersed along with the captain. Midoriya sighed and sat down on the pavement. This whole stakeout had been a bust. Or, he thought it had, until a loud explosion, and the sound of two crashing vehicles echoed a few blocks away. Tsuyu? He worried aloud, deploying his spider legs and leaping from roof to roof until he had reached the source of the sound. Peering down onto the street from a rooftop, he gasped. It was him. The rat bastard wearing kakin as a skin suit. He had used an explosion to blow the armored truck into the police cruiser, and was taking as much of the drugs as he could fit under his arm from the back of the now destroyed car. Midoriya didn't see any of the officers, but he assumed that, at best, they were out cold from the impact. He was about to leap down to the streets, but was startled as the back door of the police car was booted open, and Azui leapt out, using her tongue to grab the back of the villain's leg, and rocketed herself towards the kakin's body, kicking him in the back and making him drop the drugs. Damn it. He heard the villain yell, sending shivers down Midoriya's spine to hear an imposter's voice come from his friend's mouth. You keep shitting on my plans, don't you bitch? Tsuyu leapt to attack the sludge villain again, but he used Bakuga's explosion quirk to blast her into a building next to them, and he followed her inside through the busted window. Time to stop spectating, Deku growled, jumping to the street and using his spider legs to land, sneaking in the window as silently as possible. As soon as he entered, he felt the temperature drop at least 30 or 40 degrees. This must be a cold storage facility. 2 + 2 clicked in his head and he gasped. Tsuyu. She can't be here. He ran inside and peeked around a corner to see Tsuyu, stumbling backwards, clearly struggling to stay conscious as the sludge villain approached. You know, he scowled, this meat suit is getting a little rotten. I wouldn't mind an upgrade. The villain used an explosion to knock Tsuyu to the ground, and she weak-led tried to scoot away. He discarded Bakuga's body, leaving through the rotted opening of the left eye, leaving the corpse of Kaken in a heap on the floor, and approached Tsuyu ominously. It's time. Midoriya sprung into action, redeploying his spider legs, and landing over Tsuyu defensively. The sludge villain's eyes widened in recognition. Who? Midoriya did not answer as adrenaline overtook him. He reared up onto his back spider legs and shoved the front ones directly into the eyes of his most hated nemesis. The villain screamed in pain as Midoriya shoved him a few feet back, away from the hero in training. Blood began to seep around the spider legs, but the sludge villain began to wrap his sludge around them, jamming the appendages in place. Worried this might happen, Midoriya flipped a switch on his backpack he had prepared, releasing the spider legs as they became fully absorbed by the sludge villain. Where did you go? The blinded villain yelled impotently. Midoriya jumped back as he swung a massive, gooey arm at him. Midoriya wasted no time, grabbed 3 cryogrenades from his chest pouch, and throwing them at the villain as he tried to grow himself. They worked like a charm, and the extra power he had put in them quickly encased his villain in a block of ice. There was one crack he tried to escape from, but a 4th cryogrenade sealed it. Midoriya could see the sludge villain squirming uselessly. He had trapped him swiftly, as any good hunter would. He pulled an explosive disc from his pack and took a few steps away. I know you can hear me, you piece of shit, he said. The sludge villain had stopped moving, but Midoriya could hear muffled screams. You killed my friend, Midoriya seethed, so you've been living on borrowed time? He tried to throw the explosive, but couldn't bring himself to do it. You deserve to die, Midoriya yelled, trying to convince myself. Still, he couldn't bring himself to do it. He raised the explosive disc, but stopped when he realized he was crying. For the first time since the funeral, he was crying. You are not worth tears. I'll kill you, you sack of crap. He reared back the disc and paused, trying to convince himself to cross the threshold. It was all he thought about for the last year. All of this had been building to tonight. Do it. Do it. Before he could move, a tongue wrapped around his wrist, cementing him in place. He whipped around to see Tsuyu, barely conscious, was restraining him weakly. Midoriya, she mumbled, barely audible, but in his crisis, it sounded like she was screaming in his ears. Don't. Midoriya stood frozen like that for 5 seconds. But in those 5 seconds, an eternity passed as he slowly looked from his classmate to his prey, a war waging in his head whether to heed her advice or to finally rid the world of the murderous scum he had trapped. The sound of sirens and flashing red and blue lights broke his trance. The police were outside. Tsuyu's tongue collapsed onto the ground as she passed out, beginning to turn blue. Midoriya realized she could get in major trouble for using her quirk unlicensed, and the longer she stayed here, the more danger she was in. He tucked the explosive away. He turned to the sludge villain and said in a flat but intense tone, if you hurt anyone ever again, I will finish the job. Consider yourself lucky. Midoriya scooped Azui Tsuyu under his arm and used his grappling hook to disappear from the warehouse before the police could enter the building. Tsuyu snapped awake not long after and tried to process her surroundings. She had been wrapped in an emergency blanket, and next to her, a fire was roaring in a metal garbage can. Eyes darting all over, it became apparent she was on some sort of rooftop. Unraveling herself from her cocoon, She saw Midoriya peering over the edge of the building. Cautiously, she walked next to him and followed his gaze down to the streets. The police were containing the villain in a specialized vehicle. Another vehicle, a standard ambulance, was carting another body under a sheet into it. Midoriya, what's happening, Karo? Tsuyu asked, trying to make heads or tails of the evening she just had. Why were you here? Why did it look like you were going to? She couldn't bring herself to say the words. Midoriya sniffled and looked at her. It became obvious to her he had been crying, so she went silent. After a moment he asked, I guess I should tell you, it's a long story. Can you keep a secret? Tsuyu nodded. Mainly, she just wanted the night to make sense. Midoriya let out a long, shaky sigh. Well, a year ago, that monster, that villain killed my friend Bakugo Katsuki. That was the body he had been wearing for the last year. After he killed him, Power Loader started mentoring me on how to build things so I could enter the support course. He didn't know why I wanted to learn how to build weaponry or anything, he just thought, well, I guess he just figured I'd like it. I do, actually. Anyway, I'm getting off track. Midoriya sat down and leaned against the ledge. And ever since, I've been tracking him down. I wanted to hunt him down and learn how to stop him. Get justice for my friend. And I finally learned how. But I couldn't do it. A few more tears fell from his eyes. I failed. He sniffed and rubbed his nose. Growing up, I wanted so badly to be a hero. And everyone told me I couldn't do it, you know? I just thought, maybe if I could never be a hero, I could at least be useful and get revenge for Kaken. I can't even do that right. The last year of my life, wasted. Tsuyu sat down next to him. I don't think it was a waste, Karo. Midoriya sniffed and remained silent. Tsuyu continued. No one has caught that villain. I remember seeing that attack on the news, you know? You did something the police and the heroes couldn't for the last year, Karo. You don't get it, Midoriya sighed. He killed Bakugo. This whole year was culminating in me avenging him. And I couldn't even throw the grenade. Do you regret not killing him? That would have made you a villain too. Tsuyu replied. Midoriya paused. I don't know. Tsuyu reached over and grabbed his hand. This is already borderline vigilantism. I don't know if you not having quirk would get you off the hook on a technicality, Karo. But pros only have authority to use lethal force in the most dire of situations. Midoriya brought his knees to his chest. Tsuyu looked down at her own feet. I know I was out of it, but I don't think you wanted to do it, Karo. Midoriya looked up at her. You don't? She shook her head. You were shaking and crying. I didn't want to let you do anything you'd regret. He paused, but after a minute, his legs relaxed back down from his chest to the roof. You're right. Maybe I'm still that same stupid kid who thought he could be a hero. To his surprise, she moved closer to him and rested her head on his shoulder, making him freeze. I think you're a hero, Midoriya-chan. You do. He breathed. She nodded against his shoulder. I would have been his next puppet if you hadn't been there, Karo. You saved me. So at the least, you're my hero. Midoriya's face burned the embarrassment. Thank you, Tsu. She stood up and offered him a hand up. After a pause, he accepted. Besides, she added, I bet your friend's family is going to be really happy he can be at peace now. Midoriya gave her a small smile. Thank you, Tsu. Please don't tell anyone about this. Tsuyu returned his smile. Of course, Midoriya-chan. Just no more obsessing over villain murder. You're better than that. Okay, he relented. You win. Together, they left the rooftop of the building and boarded the late bus back towards home, exhausted from the crazy day. Tsuyu told Midoriya all about her encounter capturing the sludge villain's partners at sea, to his amazement. As they neared his stop, he looked at her and gulped. Hey, do you want to grab some ice cream tomorrow? She tilted her head at him quizzically and tapped a finger to her chin. Karo? He rubbed the back of his neck. Well, we survived a supervillain attack. I kind of figured it might be cause for celebration. She smirked to him and grabbed a pen from her arm. She wrote her phone number on his hand. Text me tomorrow and we'll meet up, Karo? He beamed as he left the bus. All right, talk to you tomorrow. That night, Midoriya kicked off his pack and collapsed onto his bed. He was exhausted, but his head was racing, emotions stirring about his heart and mind as he recapped the roller coaster of a night over and over. After an hour, he took out his phone and texted Tsuyu. "Hey, it's Midoriya. I can't sleep. Are you still up?" He was surprised to see her call him a few minutes later. He held the phone up to his ear and whispered, "Sue?" Midoriya was shocked to hear her in tears. "Midoriya, it's terrible." He furrowed his brow. He had just seen her an hour ago. "What happened?" "I just got off the phone with Uraraka. It's Ida, Karo." She sobbed. He paused, and Tsuyu explained. "He went after Stain. Just like you did. But he was alone. He didn't make it, Midoriya." Midoriya almost dropped the phone. "Oh my god, I'm so sorry. Do you need anything? Do you want me to get you anything?" She sniffed. "No. Can we put a rain check on the ice cream for a week or two? I kind of just want to be alone for a bit, Karo. That could have been us, you know?" "I'm sorry." "Don't apologize," he insisted. "You lost a friend. Please, take all the time you need. Please call or text me if you need anything." "Thank you, Midoriya," she croaked. "You're really sweet, Karo. Don't worry about it, Tsu. I'm here for you. After everything you've done for me tonight." Midoriya replied. "Thanks, I'm going to try and sleep though. Good night, Midoriya." "Me too. Good night." Midoriya did not sleep though. Instead he stood up and walked over to his corkboard. He ripped down every article and picture of the sludge villain and tore them into as small of pieces as he possibly could. He opened his laptop and printed a few articles on the hero killer, Stain, to review in the morning. He tacked a picture of the villain on the center of the corkboard. "You're next," Midoriya whispered to the picture. The day after the capture of the sludge villain, Midoriya watched the news intently with his mother. Not for glory, but to learn more about the attack near Shibuya where Stain had murdered his fellow UA student, Ida Tenya. It turned out the attack was just part of a bigger attack by the League of Villains, or so the authorities believed for the time being. Frustratingly, most of the coverage was focused on the monsters that were attacking, the same kind Midoriya had seen at the USJ, supposedly called Nomas, that had ravaged a few blocks before being stopped by Endeavor and a few lower-level pros. But finally, the newscaster went over the details, though there wasn't much. Stain had cornered and killed pro-hero Native, and Ida attempted to intervene and kill Stain. But he failed, as Stain used his blades to do in both the student and hero. Frustratingly, no one had yet to discover how Stain's quirk worked. Midoriya was annoyed with how unhelpful this was, until the newscaster shifted to the capture of the sludge villain and the recovery of the body of Bakugo Katsuki. The reporter showed a brief interview with a woman Midoriya recognized as Bakugo's mother, Mitsuki. "I'm just so glad he can rest now," she said through tears, "and that justice was finally done for my boy." Midoriya swelled with pride for a minute. Perhaps Tsuyu had been right. In the end, maybe killing the villain wasn't where he should have focused. At the least, he was glad to have given Kaken's mother some peace. Having finished the newscast, Midoriya excused himself to his room to study, grabbing an apple for brain food. Sitting down at his desk with his laptop, he paused to text Tsuyu. "Good morning. How are you holding up?" As he began to research Stain, she messaged him back. "It's rough. Uraraka is taking it really hard. They were best friends. I'm heading over to see her." He frowned. Both Tsuyu and Uraraka were nothing but nice to him, and it was terrible knowing they were going through this. He might not have really known Ida, but he seemed like a good enough guy. "That's awful, but it's really sweet you're there for her. I'm here if you need me. Let me know how it goes, okay?" Midoriya turned his attention back to his computer, going back to square one with research. All the news stories were the same. Stain's MO was consistent from every killing or crippling. He would attack a solitary hero with his blades in an ambush. Surviving heroes always said that somehow he would temporarily paralyze them, leaving them sitting ducks to disfigure in whatever way he saw fit. Printing off a fresh map, Midoriya circled all the locations Stain had struck and stood back. He frowned. The attacks were widespread and seemingly random. Don't stick to a neighborhood, huh? He supposed it made sense. Where and when weren't becoming clear. The how, while still unclear, at least was some combination of bladed fighting skills and a paralysis quirk of sorts. The what was the killing of heroes? For what? Maybe that would give him an insight on what could be done. To his knowledge, Stain had never given a statement on why he was doing what he was doing. Usually that only came out when a high-profile villain was brought in. He looked at the list of Stain's victims, trying to link them together. Still, Midoriya couldn't find a connection. All of the pros had various different quirks, specialties, their rankings were all over the place, as were their popularities. Midoriya placed his head in his hands. How do you cover your tracks so well? Distracted and disgruntled at his lack of success, he began repairing his spider legs, his most used tech, until a few hours had passed. He figured it was time to let his brain reset and he'll get an idea later. He grabbed his phone after a while and realized he had missed a text from Tsuyu not too long ago. Are you busy? Pausing on his repairs, he messaged back. No, what's up? There's a memorial for Ida tomorrow at the park hosted by the school. Would you mind coming with me? I don't want to go by myself. Midoriya's frustrated expression softened. He couldn't lose himself to revenge again. He promised to stop hunting down villains to murder them. He never said he wouldn't capture them. Of course I'll go with you. Tell me where and when to meet you. Thanks, Midoriya-kun. You're the best. Midoriya smiled and evaluated his scrap pile. I think a trip to the beach is in order. I won't be hunting down anyone if I'm not stocked up on ammunition. The next day, Midoriya put on his suit, checking himself over. It felt weird. He had never really had a conversation with Ida, so it felt a bit awkward to go to a memorial service for the taller boy. It was still sad, and he had wanted to try and talk to him about his quirk after internships were done, but you never know what the universe is going to throw your way. But today he was here for emotional support, which also was a role he wasn't familiar with. Still, if he could break down and reveal his backstory to Tsuyu, he would do his best for her. As he was getting ready to head out, he was surprised as his mother stopped him for a hug. I'm so glad you went with the support department, sweetie, she said, tearing up. What do you mean? Midoriya asked, hugging his mom regardless. If you were a hero, fighting villains all the time, Inko sniffed, I'd worry about you all the time. You could end up like that boy. Midoriya put on his best poker face, still terrible, but it somehow fooled his mom, trying not to let on that he had literally come face to face with a murderous villain less than 2 days ago, and hurried out the door. He pushed the guilt down as he boarded the bus, remembering his promise to meet Tsuyu at the entrance of the park. He allowed himself a small smile as he saw her, but it was hard to keep it seeing the distraught faces of all the students of Class 1A. A few from Class 1B had showed up as well. As he walked over to Tsuyu, she gave him a forlorn smile. Thanks for coming, Karo. To his surprise, she hugged him. Awkwardly, he returned the embrace. Of course. I'm sorry. She looked away and sighed as her eyes teared up. It's going to be weird walking home with you, Raraka, without him. At the strain in her voice, Midoriya looked up and realized people were beginning to shuffle towards the back. Hey, I think it's starting. She nodded and walked towards the rear of the park. He didn't know what to really do in this situation, but he kept a hand on the small of her back in an effort to be comforting. At his touch, she smiled at him, so he figured it was the right thing to do. The ceremony was simple enough. The principal spoke, as did All Might, talking about the importance of being a hero even as the community is hurt, and about the type of person Ida was as a loving brother and friend. Afterwards, the crowd broke apart, some leaving, some talking to remember their fallen friend. Uraraka made her way over to the two of them and immediately threw her arms around Tsuyu. Seeing Deku, she grabbed him and pulled him into a group hug. If it wasn't a somber occasion, Midoriya would have been incredibly embarrassed. I'm glad you guys are here, she said as she buried her head between the two of them. Karo, Tsuyu replied. Of course, Midoriya added. The three of them began to walk away from the park when they heard a commotion. Waste of my time, came a gruff, familiar voice. Midoriya slowed in his tracks and craned his neck over to see the commotion. Endeavor was loudly complaining about the ceremony as Todoroki sulked behind him. Father, please, he was my friend, Todoroki said, barely audible. Midoriya noticed it was a far cry from the rebellious attitude he had seen at the sports festival. You don't have time for friends, Endeavor snorted. That's not your purpose. The way he said that left a bad taste in Midoriya's mouth, but he was pulled from his eavesdropping as Tsuyu tapped on his shoulder. "Are you okay, Midoriya-chan?" she asked. "Sorry, guess I got distracted by Todoroki and his dad," he admitted. "Can't believe he said all that." Uraraka huffed. "I can see why that guy has so many haters. For the number 2 hero, he's nothing but an asshole." Tsuyu nodded. "Really pushes what counts as a hero, Karo?" Something clicked in Midoriya's mind. "Haters? Could that be? Do you guys want to grab something to eat?" Uraraka asked sadly. "If I go home I'm just going to be sad. Karo, I wish. I have to go take care of Samidare and Satsuki." Tsuyu sighed, then once she saw Midoriya's confused face, she added, "Those are my siblings." Tsuyu and Uraraka hugged again, and this time Midoriya wasn't caught by surprise when Tsuyu embraced him as well. He noticed she still blushed a bit by it too before walking off towards the bus stop. "So what do you say, Midoriya? You hungry?" Uraraka asked shyly. At first, he was tempted to turn her down. He had an idea he wanted to research about Stain, but then he saw how melancholy Uraraka looked. He remembered earlier the other morning, remembering how good it felt to know he had given some peace to Kaken's mother. Being there for people was just as important as catching villains. "Sure, I got a minute," he replied. They stopped for some ramen, but Midoriya could barely focus as his mind raced. But as they were leaving the restaurant, Uraraka said something that snapped him out of his trance. "You know, Midoriya, there's something that bugs me," she said. "What's that?" he asked curiously. She gave him a lopsided grin. "I wish I would have gotten a chance to take you on at the sports festival." Midoriya laughed. "Yeah? Why is that?" "Well, after we agreed not to go easy on each other, it would have been fun to see just how tough you are." She beamed. He smiled back. "Well, perhaps next year. Anyway, I should go. I'll see you tomorrow. Good night, Midoriya." Her face returned to the more somber look, but she looked down and kept a slight smile. "Thank you for keeping me company." He smiled back, cheeks tinged pink. "Gee, glad to help. Good night, Uraraka." As she left his sights, Midoriya took a determined look. Friend time was over. Now it was hunter time. Giving his mom the quickest greeting he could, he darted towards his room and opened his laptop and hit up the dark web. He pulled out his list of heroes who had fallen victim to Stain and began researching them. His hunch had proved correct. Nearly every hero who had been attacked by Stain had a large amount of complaints on various hero hater message boards on the more unsavory parts of the web. People complaining that they weren't of the right caliber to be a hero, that their motivations were garbage, or that they were too much of an asshole to be a hero. Is he judging the heroes? Midoriya wondered, tapping his pen to his mouth. It was a passable theory. The heroes who died were the ones with the most atrocious attitudes, known for being in the hero business only for money and fame. The ones who lived tended to be made examples of, like Ingenium, and had relatively few complaints, but were more business-minded as opposed to altruistic. Not that this ever seemed bad in Midoriya's mind. Heroism was a viable career if you had the ability for it. But the way some of these message boards stated it, if you weren't all might-like in your motivations, you were garbage. Midoriya yawned. Even if it was a workable theory, he had no way of knowing when or where Stain would strike next. Closing his laptop, he decided this could be a problem for tomorrow. It took him a year to track down the sludge villain. He wasn't going to find Stain or figure out how to combat his quirk overnight. Little did Midoriya know that it would be sooner than he thought. The next morning in class, he began drawing up plans for new weaponry while waiting for Power Loader to come in. He didn't see Hatsum sneak up behind me and give him a surprise hug. "There's my favorite vegetable." Midoriya blushed horribly as he jumped, but relaxed as he whipped around to see his support rival. "Oh, it's just you," he replied with some sarcasm. "That's no way to greet your best friend." Hatsum huffed playfully, ruffling his hair and heading to her desk. "So tell me all about your journey to Atlantis. Since when am I your best friend? I thought I was your most hated rival?" Midoriya chuckled. She rolled her eyes. "Just tell me how your internship was." Midoriya explained that it was a bit lackluster, but educational. Still, he noticed Hatsum looked a bit distracted, or trying to get something more from him. He couldn't put his finger on it. Tell me about yours, Hatsum. To his surprise, she shrugged. It was fine. Not as much fun as I thought. Mostly just repairing pro suits, you know? Didn't get to really invent anything new. That's a bummer. You were so psyched to be working on pro suits? Midoriya frowned. She shrugged once more. Yeah, well, I was hoping I'd get a chance to enhance them or something. Maybe we'll be able to for the hero course people here. Power Loader walked in the door, yawning. Alright, looks like you all lived. And even better, no one complained about any of you, which is a miracle I'm willing to take. Standing behind the desk, he looked over his students and took a lopsided grin. So now we're going to be approaching term end. So, you've all built weaponry for the sports festival, restraining systems, you've interned. This has been a pretty good start to the year for support. But that means I have to go above and beyond for your end-of-term projects. He held up his hands for air quotes, plus ultra, as they tell us to say. This got a chuckle out of his tired students, and he continued, I want to challenge you. Make you tackle a problem you might not have thought of before. So, I'm going to put you into small groups of 2 or 3, and you'll be working a special project until the end of term next month. Power Loader went around the room, separating students into various groups before getting to the back. And of course, you too. Midoriya and Hatsum exchanged looks as Power Loader chuckled. You two get to help me on something. I have a friend who needs something added or invented for her pro costume. Yes. Hatsum exclaimed, grabbing Midoriya's shoulders abruptly and shaking him around. Whatever it is, we're on it. Dizzy Midoriya asked, Who's the pro, sir? To their surprise, Power Loader looked embarrassed. Well, you'll have to come downtown with me for it. I'll get you out of your afternoon classes. This one is at my lab. Midoriya grinned, but was interrupted as Hatsum began shaking him again. We're going to a pro lab for a secret inventing project. Sure. Power Loader groaned. You don't even know what secret means, you pink-headed idiot. The project itself was unexpected. You want us to build boots for Mount Lady? Midoriya asked, unsure. This was a much better reaction than Hatsum, who looked utterly deflated. Hey, have you seen the feet of my costume? Lady huffed, holding up her foot to them. This is thin fabric. I feel everything I step on. It hurts. Power Loader said, trying to keep a straight face. The problem is, there is no material that can be used to stretch and shrink with her costume on the fly. That's what I want you two to research for your term project. Today, you're going to take her measurements in normal and giant form and start your work. Grab your stuff and meet us outside. As Power Loader and Mount Lady conversed and left Power Loader's support lab, Midoriya and Hatsum looked to each other. This is kind of a letdown. Hatsum grumbled. Yeah, Midoriya replied, but I guess that's what a lot of support is. Some of the things the pros need is mundane, you know? Compression sleeves, impact absorbers and dampers. I guess. I like the stuff you and I make, Deku Scrub. Hatsum sighed, grabbing her tool belt and measuring tape as Midoriya grabbed his. Well, maybe we can rig some secret lasers on these boots, Midoriya joked. But yeah. The stuff we made for the sports festival was so much more fun. And practical? Hatsum asked, almost suspiciously. Midoriya wasn't sure what she was getting at. But it didn't matter as the sound of a scream came from outside. Alarmed, the two support students ran out to the front of building and gasped to find Power Loader, laying on the ground motionless. Sir, they both yelled, crouching down. I'm fine. Get away from here. He grunted before passing out. They looked up, and Midoriya saw Lady had gigantified herself, giving chase to down the street. Freeze, Stain! She yelled, angrily. His eyes widened. Not today. Hatsum stood up. Come on, Deku Scrub, let's get. She looked up though and saw Midoriya chasing down Lady as he ducked down an alley. Out of here! Midoriya deployed his spider legs in the alley and scaled his way up to a rooftop, leaping from roof to roof as he followed Mount Lady desperately. It was hard to keep up with her long strides. In the distance, he saw her reach out and grab something. Maybe she has this under control. His thoughts were dashed though as suddenly Lady fell, collapsing against the pavement, making the ground shake. Or not. As he reached the edge of the roof, Midoriya froze, shocked. Like the others before her, Mount Lady had been paralyzed, as she lay on the ground trembling. Whatever had paralyzed made her revert to normal size as well. A man stood right above her neck, holding a blade to it. Deku recognized him as Stain. "You are no hero," he growled. "In it for fame and glory?" "Holy shit, I was right." "What kind of—" He raised the blade, and Midoriya found himself springing into action before he could even think. Leaping from the sky, he whipped out a magnetic bola and threw it, snapping around Stain's legs. But in a swift motion, Stain diverted his blade and cut himself free as Midoriya landed past the top of Mount Lady's head. Turning, the villain looked in Midoriya's eyes, sizing up the boy with the mechanical spider legs. "And who might you be?" "No one special, just passing through," Midoriya replied, pointing his flamethrowers at the hero killer. "Let's step away from the pro, shall we?" There were a pause as the two sized each other up, and then Stain was on the attack in a flash. He immediately jumped to his left and off a wall, and Midoriya braced, but suddenly he had a stinging feeling in his left shin. When Stain had jumped, he had thrown a knife that sliced his unprotected leg. Ignoring the pain, Midoriya leapt backwards himself and grabbed a cryo-grenade. Stain went to grab the knife and pull it towards his face, but Midoriya had thrown his weapon by then, freezing the blade to the ground. Stain was barely able to jump back and avoid the icy blast. While he was dodging, Midoriya unleashed a burst of flame from his gauntlets, but Stain hit the ground in a roll and dashed away, throwing another knife. Midoriya caught that one and snapped it with his iron gauntlet. But as he caught the blade, Stain had used the opportunity to close the distance between them and was readying an attack with his sword. Midoriya was able to parry with his own spider leg, but didn't see Stain produce another small knife with his offhand and nick Midoriya's side. In a flash, he gave the blade a lick, and Deku felt himself freeze up. It's the blood. He has to lick blood. He realized. Not that it mattered now. Suspended helplessly from his spider legs, he looked at the hero killer in terror. Stain walked up and examined the boy. "What do you think you're playing at, kid? You out for revenge just like that other punk-ass?" "I jumped because you were going to kill her." Midoriya spat defiantly, relieved his mouth still worked. His best shot now was to stall for time. It was true, to an extent. While he was definitely after Stain, he would never have struck without knowing what he was dealing with. But all logic flew out the window when someone was threatened. "Let me tell you something, kid," Stain laughed, a rather twisted chuckle. "She's not worth saving. She's here for glory and fame. You think she'd do the same for you?" "Absolutely," Midoriya replied. "She's never failed to act in any of her heroics. So she can get good photo opportunities?" Stain grunted heatedly, suddenly pressing a knife to Midoriya's neck. "I can't move, but I can feel the cold steel," Midoriya gulped. Still, he needed to keep Stain busy. Heroics in pursuit of fame and money are still heroics. If the means are just, and the end hurts no one, it's still a positive gain for the community. Stain laughed and stepped away. "Oh kid, that's where you're wrong." He turned and pointed to Mount Lady. "You glorify selfish pricks like her, or that shitwad Endeavor, you get more glory hounds. You get more fake heroes. They don't care about making the world a better place. Their kind breeds more false idols. You don't get a better world by killing heroes either," Midoriya retorted. "That makes it easier for the villains to succeed. And then better heroes will have to rise up and take their place." Stain yelled. "It's evolution in practice? But how many innocents die in the meantime?" Midoriya asked. "How many have to be sacrificed until the hero scene looks the way you want it?" Stain approached him again with his sword drawn. "It's a necessary number. They are part of the greater good." But before Stain could strike, the sound of sirens filled the alley, along with red and blue flashing lights. He looked away just long enough for a smoke bomb to hit the ground, blinding both Stain and Midoriya. Midoriya could feel someone grab him and suddenly he was lifted from the ground. He was momentarily blinded by the bright sunlight as he left the smoke, and then saw Hatsum had grabbed onto him and was wearing her boost boots. They landed on a roof and rolled across the concrete, until they stopped with her on top of him. From below, they could hear police clattering across the alley, yelling, "Where did he go?" Stain had fled in the confusion. She pulled off of him and looked him in the eyes. Midoriya gulped as Hatsum looked him over. But he wasn't expecting her to do what she did next. "It was you, wasn't it?" she asked, disheartened. "You're the one who caught the sludge guy, aren't you?" "Oh shit," Midoriya thought. Hatsum stared down at the green-haired boy she had just saved. He had frozen up at her question. Midoriya's mind raced as he looked up at her. There was a pleading in her eyes that he couldn't bring himself to lie to. She was the first friend he had made at UA, and had literally just pulled him from the jaws of death. "How did you know?" he asked, defeated. Hatsum frowned and dug into her pocket, pulling out her cell phone. The screen showed photos from a news report of the capture of the sludge villain. He was captured by being encased in ice. There are no ice heroes operating in that area. You were in that area. Not only that, she zoomed in the photos to where Midoriya had landed after jumping off of the building, revealing 4 points in the ground where a triad formation of claw marks were embedded in the cement. "These match your little spider things there." Midoriya had to stop himself from marveling at her investigative skills, but cursed under his breath. "That? It was me." "Why?" Hatsum asked, confused. The look on her usually confident and happy face just seems out of place, twisting the feeling of guilt in Midoriya's gut even further. He shifted uncomfortably. "Hatsum, this is a long story and not a lot of people know." She looked hurt to his surprise. "Don't you trust me? We've built stuff together." Midoriya furrowed his brow in confusion, and she looked away before adding, "I've never built anything with anyone besides you. I don't trust just anyone with my babies, Deku Scrub." He never really considered this, and his heart sank to realize how casually he had viewed their friendship. "No, I trust you, just, all right, I can tell you." Midoriya cleared his throat and closed his eyes. "So, growing up I had a friend, Bakugo Katsuki. When we hit 4, he kind of became this cocky guy because he had a powerful quirk. He would tease me about being quirkless, but I still always looked up to him." "Why?" Hatsum asked. Midoriya shrugged. "He was the most powerful person I knew. Being quirkless, I actually grew up wanting nothing more than to be like All Might. To be a hero, a protector. But Bakugo was so much closer than any hero. And he was so strong. To me, he was victory. Until that sludge villain showed up." "I knew the name sounded familiar," Hatsum interrupted with a grimace. "He's the one who died." "Right," Midoriya sighed. "But before that attack, All Might saved me from the same villain. It seemed like a dream come true, but, Hatsum echoed. "He told me I could never be a hero," Midoriya replied. "During that, the villain escaped." Hatsum blanched. "That's a day that would kick anyone's ass. It was the worst day of my life. I lost everything that day. I looked out the window and thought about, ooh." Midoriya didn't get a chance to finish that sentence before Hatsum slapped him. "What was that for?" Hatsum glared. "You don't get to think things like that. You're too important to me. You're going to live or I'll kill you." Midoriya's face softened. "I don't just, that one time. Anyway, Power Loader was at the funeral and found this dorky notebook I've been keeping since I was little about heroes' quirks. Said I had a good mind for analyzing and inventing, and he mentored me for months on how to build things." "You mean you haven't been doing this your whole life?" she asked. "You're so good though." He laughed a bit. "No, just the last year or so. Anyway, the whole time, I was planning on using what I built to avenge my friend. And when I finally caught him, I almost did, but Tsuyu was there and stopped me. That was the night Ida died. And I was at the memorial yesterday. Everyone was so sad. I decided to take what I learned and do it again." Hatsum looked stern, glaring down at the boy. "So you decided to just charge off after Stain when he showed up and get yourself killed, you dumbass?" Well, you know," Midoriya replied, scratching his nose awkwardly. "I just saw him attack him lady and kind of just stopped thinking." Hatsum, to his surprise, just leaned down and hugged him. "You idiot, you still want to be a hero, don't you?" Midoriya returned her hug, slowly. I don't know. But..." He paused and the two pulled apart, so Midoriya continued, "I want to catch him. He killed Ida, and took a friend away from Tsuyu and Uraraka. Like what happened with you?" she asked quietly. Midoriya nodded. Hatsum groaned, but let out a rueful laugh and smiled. Well, that does it. That does what? Midoriya asked, squinting. She rolled her eyes and grinned broadly. I'm not even going to bother trying to talk you out of it, because you're a bull-headed idiot, so I'll just have to help you and make sure you don't go getting killed. That was definitely not where he thought his pink-haired friend was going. What? Her expression softened a bit. You're the only person who gets my passion for inventing. Even if you're not nearly as experienced. I can't go letting you die on me. Let me help. We can make better tech together. Besides, her broad grin returned, I want to make gear for heroes. Might as well start with my little nerdy hero in training Deku Scrub. You're stuck with me now. Midoriya laughed. You know, my friend called me Deku a lot. I was kind of thinking of using it as a code name. Then you started calling me that? Well, it's settled. We're partners. Let's make babies together and stop some bad guys. Hatsum beamed. Midoriya's face burned as he covered his face with his hands. That's not something you should say while lying on me. Also, can you get off? This is starting to hurt. Hatsum had completely forgotten she was laying on top of him from her rescue, and for one of the first times since it had met her, she blushed slightly. Yeah, that makes sense. She stood up and offered him a hand, pulling him to his feet. We should get back to Power Loader, make sure he and the giant lady are safe. Midoriya nodded. Right. Let's tell him we ran and hid somewhere, deal? Deal. She laughed. Using their gear, they went over a few rooftops, away from where the police were scouting, and descended into an alley. Hitting the streets, they looped back to where Power Loader was, back in the lot of his lab, now on his feet, with MT Lady and a group of officers. Oh good, there you two are, Power Loader sighed, running up to the two of them as soon as they came into view. I had no idea where you ran off to. Well, you told us to get out of there, so we found a building and hid, Hatsum replied coolly. I'm glad to know you were worried though. Midoriya decided to let her do the talking. She was way better under pressure. Well, you two are nothing but a nuisance and I'd be glad to be rid of you, but you know, not like that. Power Loader said, a bit flustered. Look, let's finish taking statements, then we can take the measurements and get started. Thankfully, neither of us were hurt too badly. The two students looked over and overheard the final bits of Mr. Lady's official statement. So he had me paralyzed face down, and I don't know who intervened, but he was yelling to some kid about me being a glory hog. Me Lady huffed with arms folded as she explained her statement to the police. He better hope I don't catch him again, or he'll be a stain on the pavement. Good one, the officer replied, but the hero just gave him a glare. Sorry. Midoriya and Hatsum exchanged glances and sighed in relief. For some reason, it hadn't even struck either of them that MT Lady might have overheard the whole ordeal. Thankfully, nothing too pertinent had been said. Luckily for them, the officers took their statements together, so they were able to lie and say they had run to the nearest office building and waited until the coast seemed clear and they saw the sirens. Satisfied, the police left, and Power Loader urged his 2-star pupils to get back to work. As the day wore on, they finished doing what was requested of them, taking detailed measurements of MT Lady's feet. Midoriya did his best not to think about all the disgusting deep web posts he had seen about her giant feet, but it was hard not to get a little grossed out by those memories as he worked. As the two students compared notes, they overheard Power Loader and the pro talking in his office. So, Power Loader began, sounding oddly nervous, are we still on for dinner this weekend? Both Midoriya and Hatsum lowered their clipboards and their jaws hung open. Let's see how those two students of yours do, and we can talk plans, the younger heroine replied flirtatiously. I'll call you Wednesday. Toodles. The lady left his office and sauntered out of the lab, not noticing the incredulous stares she was getting from the pro's protégés. Power Loader burst forth immediately after, and clapped to the two of them. Okay, so you guys will need to give this project your all. You will be working on it at the school, but use anything here at the lab you might need, and if you need to stay late, don't be afraid to. He checked his watch and grunted. But it is getting late and you two should get going. Be ready for tomorrow. As the two walked away from his lab, Hatsum let out a frustrated groan as soon as they were out of earshot. I can't believe he's putting us, the two most brilliant inventors UA has seen in decades, on a freaking project to get himself laid. Midoriya blushed and laughed. Well, at least it will be a challenge, right? No one has invented a soul that can expand like the suit materials. I guess, she grumbled. She looked around and lowered her voice. So, did you learn anything from your fight? Sounds like you guys had a battle of wits. Midoriya smiled and whispered, actually yes. I know how his quirk works. He has to lick someone's blood, and it allows him to paralyze them, probably only for a few minutes, but no idea how long or if there are any factors. Yeah, those pants aren't cutting it in a knife fight. Hatsum frowned. Pun not intended, but I'm glad it happened. Yeah, he kept going for my legs, which I couldn't protect with my gauntlets or spider legs. Midoriya agreed. Also, he's doing this because he doesn't think heroes now are good enough. He thinks they're glory hogs and selfish, and they inspire more villainy. Stuff like that? Hatsum rubbed her chin. Well, that could maybe be helpful. Her eyes lit up though and she began to rub her hands together. But first, we need to find a way to prevent him from cutting you. The problem is he's fast too, Deku added. It's easy enough to cover myself in armor, but if I can't catch him, it's not going to work. Well, guess that gives us two challenges. Hatsum grinned. Let's get this stupid shoe thing out of the way so we can make you the world's greatest quirkless hero. Midoriya laughed. Maybe having a partner wouldn't be so bad. Tuesday morning flew by. They focused on their official schoolwork while under the watchful eye of their love-struck teacher. It was a challenge. No other materials expanded other than the specialized cloth made for gigantifying quirks, and that technique was heavily patented. To make a cloth for a hero to expand, it had to be made from their hair so it matched DNA. There was no way to make metal or rubber from hair that was known to man, and their experiments weren't helping either. This is impossible. Midoriya groaned, and the smell of burnt rubber is starting to really get gross. Yeah, I think this is a dead end, Hatsum sighed, frustrated, rubbing her chin. Maybe we should be looking at it another way? Good thinking, Midoriya agreed, scratching his head. If we can't make the material grow, are there other ways to make something expand? Maybe. He looked down at his backpack. Maybe something telescopic like my spider legs or your stilts? She snapped her fingers and pointed at him. That's gotta be it. Her growth takes a few seconds, so could we maybe use some sort of pressure-activated system? Midoriya began scribbling down some blueprints on it, making notes of all their ideas. The lunch bell rang, and Midoriya hastily finished his notes on the blueprint roll. Are we working on this after school? I cleared out my schedule. It wasn't hard, it was a whole lot of nothing. Yeah, I figured we could work on that and our side project, Hatsum grinned. Even in the cafeteria, they were scribbling notes down on their ideas for their final project. They were so engrossed in the project, they didn't even notice Azui and Uraraka approach them and sit across from them until Zero Gravity Hero cleared her throat. Whoa! Deku exclaimed, embarrassed. Sorry guys, we were really wrapped up in our end-of-term project. His voice softened. What's up? There's like a rain cloud hanging over Class 1A after what happened, Uraraka answered, frowning and poking at her food absent-mindedly. Is it okay if we sit here? Yeah, I like rain, but not when it's metaphorical, Karo, Azui added. I could put a heat lamp over your guys' table, Hatsum suggested, rubbing her chin, some fake sun. Next best thing to a real one. Or they could just sit here, Midoriya rolled his eyes. Ignore her, she takes things a bit too literally. Don't ignore me, I'm the brains of this operation. Hatsum huffed. The two hero course students laughed. You two are a riot. What are you working on? Uraraka asked, happy for the distraction. End-of-term project, Midoriya answered. Power Loader has us working on some gear for a pro. Using our free labor to impress his love interest, more like it, Hatsum huffed, had us taking requests from M-Lady at his lab. Midoriya cringed. Keeping secrets was not a strong suit of Hatsum. Tsuyu and Uraraka both gasped. Wait, you were there yesterday. That's when Stain attacked, wasn't it? Tsuyu questioned. Hatsum seemed to realize her error just in time to catch a death glare from Deku. Yeah. We were in the lab though when it all went down, thankfully. She answered, trying to make the save. Running with her story, Midoriya nodded. He didn't seem to know we were there when it all went down. Still, he was catching a very quizzical gaze from Azui, and he knew she'd have questions for him later. So what's your guys' end-of-term assignment? Midoriya asked, hoping to change the subject for the time being. Someone heard we would be fighting robots again, but I think there might be a surprise instead, Karo, Azui replied. You guys aren't making some secret project for fighting us heroes, are you? Uraraka asked with a wink. Like a mega zero pointer? A negative pointer? I wish, Hatsum laughed. The bell rang for afternoon classes, ushering the students to make their way back to the calls. As they were leaving, Midoriya was stopped by Azui as Uraraka and Hatsum walked on ahead. Midoriya-chan, she said quietly. I heard about that attack. Someone intervened and stopped MT Lady from getting killed, the news was saying. Midoriya couldn't bring himself to lie to her as she gave him her inquisitive gaze. It was me. He winced at the look of betrayal that washed over her large eyes as she whispered, Midoriya, you said you weren't going to hunt anyone down anymore. I said I wouldn't kill anyone, and I wasn't planning on running into him. Honest. He replied quickly, we were in the lab when he attacked Power Loader and MT Lady. And when he was about to kill her, I kind of just stopped thinking and jumped in there to stop him. I guess that's understandable, she conceded, though still looking none too pleased with him. You're not planning to go after him, are you, Karo? He looked away. I am. She scowled. Karo Midoriya, going after a villain while unlicensed makes you just as bad. Why would you risk your life to do something that dash? Be because I saw how much he hurt you. He answered shakily. Azui paused and turned a deep crimson. Karo. Midoriya rubbed the back of his neck. You really saved me there that night, Tsu. You stopped me from crossing the line. And then hearing how heartbroken you were when Ida died, and seeing how upset you were at his memorial, I couldn't let that go. I want to be a hero. I don't want people to lose loved ones like you and I did. I'm going to stop staying. Azui studied him. It made him uncomfortable after a few moments, and he realized she was still not sure what to say. Finally, she croaked, we need to get to class. W8. He said, but she was already walking away. We can talk later, Karo? She replied, not looking back. As she left his sight, he slapped his forehead. I'm such an idiot. She probably thinks I'm some kind of stalker creep. He walked to class, just barely making it to his seat before Present Mike showed up. It was hard to focus though, he just kept seeing that hurt look on Tsu's face. After school, he and Hatsum worked into the evening in the support lab at school. Sounds like you and Froggy are having a lover's tiff, Hatsum joked as they finished their prototype soul for Mr. Lady. Hardy har. Midoriya sighed. I do feel bad though. I mean she has a point, what we're doing could get us in big trouble. Well, sometimes even heroes have to ask themselves whether they should be lawful or good. They aren't always the same, Hatsum shrugged. Gotta figure out what matters more to you, Midoriya. That's surprisingly deep for you, Hatsum. Midoriya replied, what do you think? Oh, that's why I'm not interested in being a hero. I'd rather just be rich and successful building my babies. I'll leave the moral dilemmas to you. Hatsum answered, finished with a very tiny screw. That sounds more like you. Midoriya deadpanned. How goes the soul? Should be ready for testing tomorrow, she gloated, clapping, which brings us to Project 2, Stain Removal. Oh, good name. Midoriya laughed. Thanks. Hatsum beamed. Think of anything? Actually, yeah, from my fight with the sludge villain and watching Uraraka's fight with Mineta. He replied, pulling out a small sphere, similar to his ice and incendiary explosives. This is a glue grenade. Hatsum inspected it closely. What's the specs on it? If I hit him with it, it explodes into a wad of high-strength, thick adhesive, and then hardens quickly when exposed to the air. Won't be able to cut his way out of that. Midoriya answered, a hint of pride coming through. Your brilliance almost reaches half that of my own, Deku Scrub. Hatsum laughed, I like it. Have you tested it? Midoriya nodded. Was stuck to my doorknob for like an hour last night. Don't ask. She snorted. Sounds about right. What do you have for avoiding him from getting your blood? Midoriya shrugged, I didn't get that far. Hatsum beamed. That's why you need me watching your back, Deku Scrub. See all these little steel panels we've been using? It gave me an idea. What's that? Well, you've already got bigger panels going down your arms, just bigger. We use these little ones to make armor going down the rest of you. The panels are small enough you'll be able to move like chainmail. Hatsum explained. How long do you think that will take? Deku replied. Sounds like it could work. Probably a while. She replied. Suddenly, without warning, she grabbed some cloth measuring tape and began grabbing him all over. What are you doing? Midoriya shouted. How are we going to build you telescopic armor for you if I don't know your measurements? Hatsum asked. Duh. As logical as it was, her measuring the diameter of his thighs made him tremble nervously. Sure. I just don't want Stain killing anyone in the meantime. Hatsum paused. Any ideas on what we should do? Midoriya thought, rubbing his chin. Well, he hates fake heroes. There's got to be something we could do for that. Hatsum and Midoriya's eyes met and they both widened in sync. That's it. They yelled in unison. We need to make me a mask. Midoriya exclaimed, grabbing some supplies from the back of the room. Might as well make it a full helmet, Hatsum suggested. And the two worked into the night, until Midoriya got a rather angry phone call from his mother, wondering when he'd come home. Hatsum giggled as he hung up, red-faced. You go on ahead, Hatsum assured him. I'll be done soon. All right. Good night, Hatsum. Midoriya smiled. And thanks for all your help. Don't get mushy on me, Deku Scrub, Hatsum replied, grinning. Sweet dreams. As Midoriya began walking home, his phone buzzed. He saw it was a text from Azui. Are you busy? No, just heading home, he replied. I'm sorry for freaking out on you, Midoriya-chan. I just don't want you to get hurt. Midoriya frowned. He didn't want to worry her, by any means. I promise I won't do anything reckless anymore. Don't lie to me. Midoriya sighed as he boarded the bus back home. Yeah. I'm still going after Stain. I'm sorry. I still think it's a bad idea. But I know I can't talk you out of it. I just don't want to lose you, like I lost Ida, or you lost your friend. You won't? You better mean that, Midoriya. You still owe me ice cream. Midoriya smiled. Maybe he hadn't screwed up too badly. The next morning, Midoriya got to school early, as he promised Hatsum. He opened the lab door and saw she was already there. Hey, Deku Scrub. She waved, and Midoriya noticed she was in the same tank top as yesterday, and there were dark circles under her eyes. Hatsum, did you go home last night? He asked, concerned. What time is it? She asked. She pulled out her phone and laughed. Guess I pulled an all-nighter. Oops. You nutcase, that's really bad for you. Midoriya scolded. Isn't your family worried? Hatsum ignored him and held up her finished helmet. Tada! I modeled it after your doodles from your hero notebook. Midoriya blushed. She had caught him making notes in his hero notebook, and she had done a good job making a green helmet, with ears on top to mimic All Might's hair. I didn't realize you had seen that. Zoom quirk, Deku Scrub. She replied, pointing to the crosshairs in her eyes. I see, Yurith Haye. She giggled. The lack of sleep was making her a bit loopy. Loopier than usual. That's creepy, Midoriya replied, putting the helmet on. It was just the right size, and the visor hid his eyes while allowing all the same functions his goggles had. Heat vision, shaders, zoom, they were loaded. This is awesome though. Should we get Stain's attention tonight? Yes. Hatsum cheered. Why do you think I powered through all night to finish this for you? Midoriya beamed. Thanks, Hatsum. I'm really glad I have your help. And I'm glad to make such cool babies. Now let's get to class before Power Loader finds an excuse to expel me. Hatsum replied. Midoriya was so excited to begin phase 2 of their plan, he didn't even mind when Hatsum fell asleep on his shoulder during their afternoon classes later that day. She had earned it. Hiroki Taichi was a thug. Worse than that, he was a murderer in a red room, and he took great joy in making innocent women suffer for whatever perverted deep web lurkers got off on it. As he set up his webcam, he spoke to his viewers. Greetings, dark web faithfuls. Sorry for the long delay. Hope you're all ready for a little fun. He pointed to the camera at the woman bound and gagged against a chair in the middle of the room. Honestly, he couldn't remember her name, and it didn't matter. He slowly walked behind her and removed the blindfold and gag. Immediately, she looked around and began screaming. Hiroki rolled his eyes and slapped her across the face, hard. "Oh, shut up. Let's see who wants to play with you today." He walked over to the side of the room and unfurled his tool belt of knives. But as he began rubbing them together, making a terrifying sharpening sound, he heard a tapping on the other side of the wall. What? He wondered. Without warning, a telescoping spider-like tentacles broke through the brick, and the claws wrapped around his throat. Lifted off the ground, the tentacle then zoomed backwards, slamming him against the wall, knocking his knives and the table all over the floor. It repeated the process, slamming Hiroki into the wall repeatedly until he was bloody and unconscious. Midoriya Izuku then burst through the wall with his other spider legs as the captive woman screamed in confusion. In her defense, he realized a guy in a weird rabbit helmet on spider legs with flamethrowers on his arms would scare anyone being held against their will. So, wordlessly, he untied her and she took off running. Midoriya turned to the camera. "Bring Stain." He grunted, the voice-modifying software in his helmet making his shaky voice deep and unrecognizable. Then, he crushed the camera with his spider claw. With the camera off, he tied up the Hiroki Taichi in capture tape, and after he was safely out the building, Hatsum called the police anonymously. She had been watching from her laptop, communicating with Deku from an earpiece built into the helmet. "Did you record it?" Midoriya asked into his headset as he jumped from rooftop to rooftop. "You know it, Deku Scrub," she crowed, "now to make it go viral. Stain will be quite distracted if I do say so myself." Midoriya smiled to himself. "Your time is up soon, Stain." To Hatsum and Midoriya's delight, their plan had worked. Over the next 2 weeks, their video of the mysterious hero interrupting a Red Room murder spread across the internet and the news media like wildfire. Stain had vanished since, although with how randomized his attacks had been, no one knew if that was related. But people were talking, which meant they were on the lookout for any activity of the hero killer now more than ever. With finals fast approaching, it gave Hatsum and Midoriya the perfect excuse to stay after school and discuss their next steps. The boot is finished. Hatsum cheered. With a week to spare. Now we can pretend we're still working on this stupid MT Lady project in class and focus on Operation Stain Removal. That had proved to be tricky. Cramming body armor into one backpack to spread across Midoriya's whole person was harder than they thought. Not only that, but with all the different curves of the human body, it kept jamming. The both groaned as the telescopic steel plating jammed around his knees, clicking uselessly for the 15th time that afternoon. Midoriya flicked a switch on his backpack strap, retracting the armor, and taking the backpack off. "I don't think this is working." Midoriya groaned. "Maybe we should just make an armor suit? From scratch?" she asked. "That could take months, and then to make it mobile?" Midoriya shifted his eyes. "Not if we had one we just had to modify." "Wait, what are you talking about?" Hatsum asked, suspicion in her tone as she stepped towards him with arms folded. "No secrets if we're going to be business partners." Midoriya scanned the room again, despite having been alone in there with her for hours, to verify once more that no one could overhear. "Remember the training I mentioned Power Loader gave me? What about it?" "It may have had me build a mech suit to give me a crash course in robots and programming and weaponry," Midoriya answered, not able to look her in the eyes. "You what?" she screamed. "And you didn't tell me this 2 weeks ago?" "Go get it, you idiot." "He didn't let me keep it," he replied, throwing his hands up. "It's probably stored somewhere in his lab. He said he'd get in big trouble if he gave a flame-throwing mech suit to a kid. That's just him trying to get in the way of progress." Hatsum scowled. "We still have access to his lab, let's just go borrow it." "Borrow it?" Midoriya echoed, hands in his pockets. "You think that will work? You think he won't notice a mecha suit going missing?" A light bulb flashed above both of their heads. "Actually, we built it to my specifications," Midoriya realized. "Yeah, he can't use it," Hatsum added, a Cheshire cat grin spreading across her face. "So if he's just storing it, maybe we can take it before he knows it's gone." Let's go grab some gear from his lab and see if we can't find it, Deku suggested, and see if we'd be able to work with it. As they left the lab, Hatsum was practically skipping down the falls of UA in excitement. I get to work on a mech Suyuyit, she declared in a sing-song voice. Deku couldn't help but smile at the joy she took in their inventing. He had to admit, even though they were hunting down the hero killer, it was much more fun doing this together. So if we can get this thing out of the lab, should we work on it tomorrow? We could get so much more work done on a Saturday than after school, Hatsum suggested. Midoriya gulped. I actually have plans with Azui. We're getting ice cream. After weeks of turbulence, Class 1A had settled, and Suyu had asked if they could go out like they had planned before Ida had passed. In addition to being nervous at the prospect of a date, he was also worried she'd want to talk about his hunt for Stain. For how often Hatsum teased him about his crush on Suyu, he was surprised to see how crestfallen the news made her. Guiltily, he added, "We could on Sunday?" She perked up and beamed at him. "All right. I'll text you my address and we're going to make this suit invincible." He laughed as they approached the bus stop. "Let's see if we can even get it out of the lab first." As they rode towards the other side of town, Deku filled her in on the specs. It doesn't have much in the way of weaponry, it was mostly just flamethrowers and impact dampeners. It was also reinforced to make it more easy to lift heavy objects, but that's about it. "That's easy enough to work with," Hatsum assured him. "We could add a pack like yours and wire some more weapons system to it, no problem. Mobility is going to be a big thing." "Well, I don't think my spider things could carry something that heavy," Midoriya admitted, "but maybe we could make boots like yours for it? That would enable it to make some long jumps and generally help carry the weight." The two spent the rest of the bus ride spitballing ideas to each other. Arriving at Power Loader's lab in the early evening, they caught the pro just as he was leaving. "Didn't I get enough of you two during the day?" he grunted, seeing them together. "We were just wondering if we could use some parts and equipment here," Midoriya requested, politely, knowing he would get farther in the discussion with their teacher than Hatsum would, for the MT Lady project, of course. Power Loader paused, and cautiously handed a copy of the front door key to Midoriya. "You are not to let her have these," he instructed, pointing to Hatsum. "I'm right here," she objected, slightly hurt. "I know," Power Loader deadpanned before turning back to Midoriya. "Lock up when you're done." As they entered the lab, Hatsum grumbled, "That's garbage, I can't believe he trusts you more than me." "You went 5 for 5 on explosions in class last week," Midoriya pointed out with a laugh. "Nothing blew up this week," Hatsum yelled, throwing her hands up in the air. "You are the worst." "Come on, it's probably in the back," Midoriya suggested, ignoring his rival. "The worst," she repeated, following him. The lab had a few offices up front before leading to the workshop in the back. But before the workshop area, they stopped in front of a door labeled, "Authorized personnel only." This one was, unfortunately, locked with a key card swipe. "Probably should have seen this coming," Midoriya stated nervously. "See, this is why you're the worst," Hatsum replied, pulling a small plastic card out of her work glove. "You underestimate me once again. You think I only have lockpicks for old-school locks?" She swiped the white piece of plastic across the keycard slot, and it beeped with a green light. She pulled the door open for her partner. "After you." "Point Hatsum," she gloated. "Hatsum, that's amazing." Midoriya gushed, thoroughly impressed with the electronic lockpick. "You've got to teach me how to make that." Hatsum beamed. "Isn't it? At least you can appreciate my babies. Later though, look at that." The room itself stored many of Power Loader's various support augmentations and suits, but in the back behind a bulletproof glass case was the suit he and Midoriya had built last summer. "There it is," Midoriya exclaimed proudly, running over to it. It had another swipe card access panel. "Think it's safe for us to take it?" Midoriya asked. Hatsum looked around. "Well, everything in this room is caked in dust. When do you think the last time he was in here was?" The two inspected everything, and to their relief, the mech suit was the least dusty thing, which meant they were in the clear. Hatsum used her baby to bypass the swipe system and open the glass case. Midoriya ran his hand down the arm of the suit. "I missed this guy." Hatsum inspected it closely. You say you guys made this with scrap from a beach? She knocked the metal. This is so sturdy. You're kidding me. It's true. Midoriya insisted, beaming. Now how do we get it out of here? They exchanged looks. Neither of them had thought of that. It made for an awkward bus ride home though, as Midoriya sat in his mech suit next to Hatsum. Every weird look they got was met with a hurried, "It's a school project. Isn't it cool?" from Hatsum. Oddly enough, everyone seemed to buy it as they left the bus and headed for Hatsum's house. Are you sure your family isn't going to mind a guy in a mech suit just waltzing into your house? Midoriya asked as Hatsum unlocked her front door. It's just me and my dad, Deku Scrub, Hatsum assured him, and he's honestly never home. Oh, I'm sorry. Don't worry about, she answered, sincerely, we get along fine, he just works a lot and has his own life with me in UA and stuff. Come on, we'll put that in my basement, and you can tell me all about your date with the Frog Princess on Sunday. Don't say it like that, Midoriya objected as he followed her down the stairs. And you said I'm the worst? The next day, Midoriya met Tsuyu at the park for their long-delayed ice cream meeting. She had made it there first, and was waiting for him just outside the entrance. When he came into view, she gave him a small smile. Hey Midoriya. He smiled. Hey Tsu. He still had trouble remembering to call her Tsu. It was hard to form the habit outside of texting. Despite how much she disliked his intentions on being a vigilante, they had begun texting each other daily, comparing the different struggles their courses brought them and family life and the like. So where's this place you wanted to go? I've never been here. Tsuyu asked. No. Midoriya replied, it's right around the corner. I thought maybe we could walk through the park with it. He got a bit nervous and added, if it's not too cheesy or anything. Karo, Tsuyu replied with a smile. That sounds relaxing. These last few weeks have been crazy. As Midoriya led her down the street, he dug his hands into his pockets and inquired, what do you mean? Finals? Karo, she confirmed, they're being really secretive about what we're fighting, and I have a feeling it's not robots. If it was robots, Midoriya replied, they don't have us building them. Maybe you'll be sparring each other? Maybe, she replied, I guess being surprised is part of it though. Being a hero means never know when of what you'll face, Karo. I guess that's true, you have to be able to adapt, Midoriya said, here's the place. They ordered 2 cones, Tsu thoroughly teasing the generous amount of sprinkles Midoriya asked for on his, and made their way back to the park. Thank you, Midoriya-kun, I definitely needed this. You're welcome to. So what are you doing to prepare for the mystery finals? Midoriya asked, licking his treat. Karo, just general training. Tsu sighed. Have to be in peak physical condition, Karo? Well, I think you look amazing. Midoriya blurted out, not thinking about his words. Thanks, Karo. Tsu blushed. You're cute too. No, I meant your F fighting and F fitness, he stuttered. BB, but you are C cute too. As they began walking the park, Midoriya found he was able to calm down a bit and converse like an actual human, thankfully. So how long have you known about this place? She asked. Oh, I used to come here with my friends as a kid all the time, he replied, a little sad. Her expression turned curious. With Bakugu? He nodded as he took a bite out of the cone. Yeah? See that stream? He pointed down the path they were on towards a bridge over a small creek, in a rather secluded section of the park. She turned towards it and nodded, reaching her tongue across to her arm to lick her cone. Yeah, why? That's actually where he started to bully me, Midoriya replied with nostalgic laugh. Kind of dumb to realize. He fell in there and I offered to help him out. He was mad. He thought I was looking down on him. Karo, that's so weird. Tsuyu said, laughing with him. Why do you think he was like that? Probably just wanted to be the best. Not rely on anyone. We both had this dream of being the #1 hero, Midoriya explained, but he's the one who had the power to back it up. They stopped at the bridge overlooking the stream and both leaned against the railing. And yet, here you are, Karo? Yeah, Midoriya said. Weird how life works out. I'm the one who survived, quirkless, and am hunting down bad guys. So, any word on staying after you and your friend put out that video? She asked. After the video had gone viral, she had pieced it together pretty quickly that it was him, though officially his alibi when asked later is that he was with Hatsum studying at the library. As this is something he had done with her before, she simply hacked the timestamps of their check-in times. He shook his head. He's gone totally quiet. Which, I mean, is good. But I don't know what it means. Probably wishful thinking to hope you scared him off, Karo, Tsuyu joked. Yeah, Midoriya replied. I know I can't talk you out of it, Karo, she began, but you don't have to be the one to bring him in. He paused. Remember that night we ended our internships? Kinda hard to forget, Midoriya-kun. Tsuyu croaked. Sludge guy tried to make me his meat puppet. Weird day. He smiled to her. Very funny. But I meant it. You really saved me by stopping me from killing that villain. But when we were doing that, Ida got killed. And I saw how much it hurt you. Hurt everyone. I thought. He stopped to slap his leg. Sorry, mosquito. What? He pulled his hand up to see a trickle of blood on his hand. It was far too much to have been made by any sort of insect. Tsuyu met his gaze. Run, he whispered to her. She jumped away, and Midoriya went to give chase, but no sooner had he taken one step did his entire body lock up and he crashed onto the wooden bridge. Tsuyu turned around to grab him, but there was already a figure standing between them. Stain, who had been hiding under the bridge, had climbed up, swiftly placed himself between the two teens. He already had the point of his blade pointed at Midoriya's neck. He was giving the boy an intense look of malice that sent chills down both teens' spines. Don't move, he hissed to Tsuyu. All I want is to have a little chat with our friend here. If I have to do anything further, that will be on you. Tsuyu's eyes darted around. This was a rather secluded area of the park, and there was no one in sight. She clenched her fists but stayed put. Don't hurt him, Karo. What do you want? Midoriya asked, trying not to let the panic show in his voice. Stain looked down to Midoriya. Look, kid. I saw your video. Hard not to. Midoriya didn't say anything. He was caught completely off guard. Just as he was about to tell Tsuyu, he thought he had a knack for tracking down tricky villains. Maybe it worked too well. You're out of your depth, kid. Stain laughed. Using the same tech you used in your televised sports festival? Tracking you down was easy. But I'm going to give you one warning to stay out of my business. Stain crouched down by Midoriya. Watching you squirm is fun, kid. Was clear Stain was enjoying the position the three of them were in, so Midoriya needed to stall for time, once again. Why would you do that? Midoriya asked, slowly. You never let anyone walk away. Oddly enough, kid, because you fascinate me, Stain smirked. You've actually got the hero spirit, intervening where you aren't needed to save that useless pro. Believing in the broken system. Maybe you remind me of a young Stain. Stain's voice got really low. But listen, if you come looking for me again, I will kill you. He pointed his sword towards Tsuyu and looked over to her. But while he did, Midoriya realized he could move again. He pulled a small tracking device from his pocket and stuck it on Stain's leg, before putting his hands where they originally been. And when I skin you alive, I'll make your friend watch. Stain scowled. Now get out of here. Stain jumped from the side of the bridge abruptly, making a splash in the stream below. Tsuyu peered over the side of the bridge after him, but he was nowhere in sight. She ran over to Midoriya as he began to pull himself to his feet and wrapped him in a hug. Midoriya-chan, are you okay, Karo? She asked. He nodded, heart racing and pounding in his ears. I'm okay. I'm okay, he exhaled shakily. Let's get out of here. They ran from the park, and Midoriya couldn't stop himself from scanning every person they passed for signs of that deformed face, and looking over his shoulder. He could be anywhere, behind any tree. Midoriya-chan, Tsuyu said, grabbing his hand as they reached the entrance of the park. Huh? He asked, gasping. He was spiraling mentally, and she could see it. You're hyperventilating, Tsuyu answered quietly. Come on, let's go somewhere. They boarded another bus, shaking the entire time. As they sat down, she turned to him and asked, I saw you move. What happened? I have a theory his quirk works differently depending on people's blood types. After a minute or two I was able to move. I put a tracking device on him. I don't think he knew I was able to get free. He explained. He pulled his phone out of his pocket and went to open the tracking app, but he couldn't, his hands were shaking too hard. His breathing sped up again. Tsuyu gently grabbed his hand again. Midoriya, breathe. You're freaking out again, Karo? Sorry, Midoriya exhaled. He had me dead to rights. I never saw him coming. He gave a bitter laugh. And here I thought I was good at this villain hunting thing. Are you giving up? She asked as the bus screeched to a halt. They walked off the bus, Midoriya shrugging. I don't know. What if he's right? What if I'm out of my depth? Maybe I'm not cut out for this. That was humiliating. He looked around, seeing they were in a part of the city he wasn't used to, outside of school he had never seen. Where are we? He asked. This is where I went to school last year, Azui replied. Come on, I want to take you to my favorite spot. She led him around the back of the school to a field. At the other end of the field was a small pond surrounded by tall trees. It was a beautiful scene as the setting sun tinted the landscape gold. She sat down on the side of the pond and pat the ground next to her, signaling him to sit. He did as such, and she asked, Know what I think? What's that? Midoriya asked. A few weeks ago, I almost died, Azui answered, and one of the most brave and creative people saved my life, Karo. He blushed. He must be a pretty cool guy, Azui-san. Call me Tsu, Karo? She replied, and I think he's pretty great. But before that? I was terrified, Karo. Yeah? Midoriya asked. I never even stopped to ask, I'm sorry. She shook her head. Don't worry about it. That was a pretty crazy night, and with what happened to Ida, it seemed small in comparison. Anyway, it was terrifying, but it made me realize something. What's that? He asked again. That's what being a hero is, Karo. She shrugged. You're going to have close calls. Look, Midoriya-kun. You know I don't agree with the whole vigilante thing, but don't let Stain get in your head. Besides, you outsmarted him. You put the tracker on him. Find him. Bring him in. Why, you really believe me I can do it? Midoriya smiled. You beat me in a fight. You aren't allowed to lose ever again. So you smirked. You better do it, Karo. She leaned over and kissed his cheek, causing him to turn bright red and lock up. Thank you, listen. I mean this. She laughed her rib-biting laugh. It's getting late. We should go. I promised my parents I'd put my little sister to bed. Let's go, Karo. A stuttering mess, Midoriya followed her back to the bus, with his heart racing for two reasons. As they stopped outside his residence, Tsuyu gave him another peck on the cheek and wished him a good night. This time, Midoriya managed to keep it together and formed the sentence, Good night, Tsu, and head upstairs. Of course, Inko had a million questions for her son that turned his face a bright red color, but he couldn't keep the smile off his face as he answered them. You make sure not to get in the way of her hero studies. Inko instructed, trying to sound stern behind her elation. She sounds like a wonderful girl. I won't, Mom. Finally, he was able to excuse himself to bed. And then he grabbed his battle backpack and snuck out of his window, using his spider legs to crawl down the side of the building. He grabbed the late bus and rode it to the other side of town. Running off the bus as it stopped, he charged down the sidewalk until he finally reached the familiar house, adrenaline driving him. He pounded on the door, not stopping until it was opened. Hatsum leaned against the doorframe groggily. What are you doing here? Am I having the good dream again? Deku blushed and blinked. Remember that? He held up his phone, showing a blinking red dot on a map. I found Stain. Hatsum's eyes widened and she snapped awake. What? She grabbed his shoulders and shook. Tell me everything. I will, he assured her, but first we need to finish our baby,